Chapter 741. After Li Yundong, Su Chan, and Zi Yuan left the door, they flew all the way in the direction of Yantai, Shandong. After flying for about 2 hours, they slowly landed. It was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The three of them chose a remote place to land, took a taxi, and drove in the direction of Penglai Pavilion. Perhaps the driver had seen the amazing beauty of Su Chan and Zi Yuan, so he kept introducing the customs of Penglai along the way. Especially when he heard that they were going to Penglai Pavilion, he said enthusiastically, "Oh, it's too late to go to Penglai Pavilion now. Why don't we go earlier? We can play a few more places. If we go now, we have to go back after a while. It's late winter now and the weather is getting late. Why bother?" Li Yundong and the others just smiled and did not answer. Seeing that they did not speak, the driver was not discouraged. He drove them through a street with a lot of seafood, still enthusiastically introducing Li Yundong and the others to eat seafood. Although Su Chan and Zi Yuan had long heard of the reputation of Penglai, this was the first time they had come here. Both of them were curiously looking at the city of Penglai. However, Zi Yuan was still sitting upright, but her head was slightly tilted. Her eyes were looking out of the car window, looking at everything around her. Su Chan, on the other hand, twisted her body and leaned against the window. She rolled down the window and rested her elbows on the glass, letting the wind blow her hair into a messy mess. Perhaps because she had heard the driver talk too much, Su Chan suddenly turned her face and said to the driver, "Look at you, it should be a sign of spleen and stomach deficiency. Seafood is very cold. I advise you to eat less seafood. Do you sometimes have diarrhea when you go back after eating seafood?" The driver was stunned for a moment. He opened his mouth wide and said, "How do you know that I like seafood? How do you know that I have diarrhea many times after eating seafood?" Su Chan raised a finger and said earnestly, "Look at you, I know that you like seafood. Eating seafood will make your spleen and stomach cold. Once the spleen and stomach are cold, it is easy to have diarrhea. These two places are not good. No matter what kind of cold food you eat, it is easy to have diarrhea. Sometimes when you eat too much, of course you will have diarrhea." The driver patted his thigh. "I thought that the seafood in some places was not clean. So that's how it is." While the two of them were talking, they had arrived at Penglai Pavilion unknowingly. After they got out of the car, they saw that at this time, the sky was already full of sunset clouds. Penglai Pavilion seemed to be covered with a layer of deep oil paint in the twilight of the sea and the sky, and its whole body was a strong color of vicissitudes. The driver also got out of the car. He wanted to talk to Su Chan again, but he saw the three of them walk to a corner. When he followed them, the three of them had disappeared. The driver stared at the straight street, dumbfounded. After a while, he slapped his thigh and said, "I've met a god. I was wondering why these three people had such an immortal aura. It turns out that they are immortals. As the saying goes, there is a fairyland in the human world, and Penglai is the place to attain the Tao." Penglai could be said to be the earliest land of fairy mountains in China. As early as the Qin and Han dynasties, it had been famous all over the world. At this time, Mount Longhu was just a nameless mountain, and Mount Mao and Mount Gazao were even more unvisited barren mountains. There was a very deep Taoist tradition on this land. Many people still retained their Taoist beliefs and yearning for the stories of immortals. After Li Yundong and the others got rid of the enthusiastic driver, they walked all the way in the direction of Penglai Pavilion. The three of them looked from a distance and saw the ancient city tower standing by the sea. The towering city wall was like a crouching giant, a long winding dragon. Under the city wall were surging waves. Looking at the sea, the golden crows gradually fell, the colorful clouds were dense, and the sky was surrounded by clouds and mist. It was like an overseas fairyland. Nearby, there was an ancient city wall covered in multicolored light. The arrow mounds on the city wall were arranged in order, extending into the distance, revealing a strong sense of historical vicissitudes. Penglai Pavilion was located at the highest point at the end of the city wall, as if they were ascending to the sky, looking at the sky and looking straight at the fairyland. Li Yundong had seen the dilapidation and vicissitudes of Mount Gazao, the beauty and magnificence of Mount Longhu, and the magnificence of Tiandu Peak. At this time he suddenly saw this fairyland on earth that had been famous for a long time. For a moment he couldn't help but be overwhelmed by this scene. Even though Su Chan had been in a low mood along the way, she couldn't help but feel refreshed at this time. She opened her small mouth wide and said with a surprised face, "It's really a fairyland on earth. If I cultivated in this place, I'm afraid I would have become an immortal long ago, right? Why has the Penglai sect always been unknown?" Li Yundong looked at this wonder with infatuation and didn't speak. Instead, Zi Yuan said, everything in the world will prosper and die. The Penglai sect was at its peak during the Tang and Song dynasties, especially after Lu Dongbin and the 8 immortals ascended to immortality here. At that time the Penglai sect reached its peak. At that time, it had thousands of disciples, and incense was constantly burning all day long. It was a pity that later the descendants of the Penglai sect didn't think about making progress and just sat back and ate. Especially in the early days of the Yuan dynasty, the Penglai sect once sent people to resist the Mongolian army. Later, Genghis Khan and Kublai believed in the words of Qiu Chuji, the Jinren of Eternal Spring, and supported the Chuanzhen sect to fight against the Penglai sect. In the last years of the Yuan dynasty, the Penglai sect had been suppressed into a small sect, with no more than a dozen disciples. At this time in the cultivation world, the 3 Taoist mountains, Mount Longhu, Mount Gazao and Mount Mao, have completely risen. The Taoist cultivation world is divided into the north and the south, and the situation of the 3 mountains has been formed. All the sects have a deep vigilance against the former glory of the Penglai sect, and from time to time they will suppress this sect. The Penglai sect has never produced any outstanding talents in the past hundreds of years, so it is difficult for them to have a chance to turn around. After Ziyuan finished speaking, Su Chan suddenly sighed and said, "Alas, wasn't our Fox Zen school like this back then? I really want to see with my own eyes what the Fox Zen school was like in its heyday." Li Yundong suddenly glanced at the little girl and thought to himself, Chana is such a simple-minded person, but she still recalls the heyday of the Fox Zen school. No wonder Lu Yi has been trying to resurrect the mystical silver fox. The 3 of them talked all the way, and before they knew it, they had already arrived at Penglai Pavilion. After buying the tickets and entering, Li Yundong looked at the tickets in his hand and then at the many tourists. He said with a smile, "It seems that at least the Penglai sect will not live a tight life. The ticket income is very impressive." Before Ziyuan and Su Chan could speak, a young man's voice suddenly answered, "Don't mention it. A lot of money has to be turned over to the country. We just take a little money to support our families." Li Yundong and the others turned their heads and saw a handsome man about 1.7 meters tall in a Taoist robe standing in front of them. He was holding a horsetail whisk with one hand and looking at them with a smile. Ziyuan recognized him at a glance. It was Yu Manlu, who she had saved at the inauguration ceremony. Ziyuan smiled slightly, formed a palm with one hand and bowed. "So it's Jinren Yu. Nice to meet you. Are your injuries better?" Yu Manlu quickly glanced at Li Yundong, who was next to Ziyuan, and carefully restrained his admiration. He bowed respectfully and said, "Thank you for your concern, Jinren Ziyuan. I'm much better now. These minor injuries are not a problem." At this time Li Yundong said with a smile, "Jinren Yu, we meet again. How did you know we would come?" Yu Manlu turned around, bowed to Li Yundong respectfully and said with a smile, "The famous fighting celestial master Li Wudi has come to Penglai. There have been many strange phenomena in the sky. When my mother saw such a phenomenon, she concluded that there would be a master coming to our Penglai pavilion today, so she sent me here early to wait." Su Chan asked curiously, "Fighting celestial master? Yundong, when did you get such a nickname?" Yu Manlu said with a smile, "It came from Japan. Jinren Li, you almost defeated the entire Japanese cultivation world with your own strength, so the Japanese call you Fighting Celestial Master. Such a reputation is really enviable." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "It's just a nickname. Don't take it seriously. But where is the strange phenomenon you mentioned? Why didn't I see it?" Yu Manlu saw that there was no complacency on Li Yundong's face, as if he didn't take such an honor seriously at all. He couldn't help but admire him even more. He couldn't help but glance at Ziyuan and sigh in his heart. Only such a broad-minded cultivator who is good at fighting can be worthy of Ziyuan Immortal, right? While he was thinking, he saw Su Chan take Li Yundong's hand and point to the distance in the sky. She said cheerfully, "I see it. Look, it's over there." Yu Manlu saw Su Chan and Li Yundong being so intimate, and he couldn't help but notice that Ziyuan was deliberately keeping a distance from Li Yundong. He couldn't help but frown slightly and think to himself, it turns out that these rumors are true. How could Jinren Li be so careless and hang out with this fox demon? His best Taoist companion should be Ziyuan Immortal. Yu Manlu thought about it for a while, only to see that Li Yundong, Su Chan, and Ziyuan were all looking from the direction of Penglai Pavilion to the distance of the sea and the sky. They saw that in the direction of the sea and the sky, clouds and mist covered the sky. In the clouds and mist, there were figures looming. Some were riding donkeys, some were holding long swords, and some were holding treasured fans. It was clearly the scene of the 8 immortals crossing the sea. At this time, Yu Manlu also calmed down and said with a proud smile, "Such a strange phenomenon, isn't it quite magical?" Li Yundong couldn't help but exclaim, "It's really amazing. I'm afraid that such a fairyland can only be seen in Penglai. It is indeed worthy of being called a fairyland on earth. It is really like the sagebrush elixir pavilion leaning against the elixir cliff, overlooking the home of the Yingzhou fairies. Looking at the sun in the Yanggu Valley at night, a clear sky rolling the sea and the clouds. Good. At this time, the tourists of Penglai Pavilion were gathering on the city tower to take pictures of such a wonderful scene from afar. All kinds of sighs and praises could be heard, but Yu Manlu didn't seem to hear them. Only Li Yundong praised him 3 times in a row. His face immediately became overjoyed and he said proudly, "Li Wudi's golden praise, even Penglai, a fairyland on earth, would be honored. Come on in please. Mother has been waiting for you for a long time." Yu Manlu was wearing a Taoist robe, while Li Yundong and the others were dressed like ordinary people. However, they spoke in a genteel manner, and their words and deeds were very similar to those of the ancient people. However, the people around them didn't feel that there was anything strange about them in a place like Penglai Pavilion. On the contrary, many people also learned to salute after seeing the Taoist priests and nuns of Penglai Pavilion. Li Yundong bowed slightly and was about to follow Yu Manlu inside when he suddenly heard a voice beside him. "Humph, it's just a mirage. What's so good about it? Strange phenomenon. A group of uneducated bumpkins. == to make up for yesterday's second night watch. I still owe everyone a night watch. I won't forget it. In addition, sometimes the recent page can't be opened. You can click on it more. Recently, the server may be under a little pressure and the company is adjusting it." Chapter 742. Li Yundong and the others looked in the direction of the voice and saw a young man curling his lips with a disapproving look on his face. Next to him was a woman dressed fashionably and wearing a pair of sunglasses. She looked quite beautiful. Yu Manlu frowned slightly and looked at them with an unfriendly gaze. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the young man also turn his head to look at them. However, Li Yundong recognized at a glance that the young man who had spoken was none other than the young man he had met under Potala Palace. Later, the young man had followed the tour guide Wuxia into Potala Palace, and then he didn't know where he had gone. He hadn't expected to meet him here again today. It was really a small world. When the young man saw Li Yundong, he was also stunned for a moment. Then he recognized that the boy in front of him was the man who had been courteously received by the living Buddha under Potala Palace. The woman beside him was also shocked. She tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Isn't this that guy?" The man's face suddenly became a little ugly. He muttered in a low voice, "That's right. How can there be any immortals in this world?" Yu Manlu snorted and said with a sneer, "There are all kinds of things in this world. The people of the immortals are all as simple as bamboo. The way of immortality is the way of nothingness." The young man was dumbfounded and asked, "What did you say?" Li Yundong smiled and said to Yu Manlu, "Jinrenyu, forget it. Let's go. There's no need to talk about these things with such people. People of different paths can't make plans together." Yu Manlu smiled and said, "Jinrenli is right. I was too serious. Come on, follow me to the backyard." They ignored the confused young man and woman and walked toward the depths of Penglai Pavilion. Li Yundong and the others passed by the 3 Pure Palace, LV Zoo Hall, Tianho Palace and other places. Pavilions, halls, corridors and walls were clearly layered. Couplets, steels, stone tables, broken tablets, and so on were everywhere, showing the profound cultural heritage of Penglai Pavilion that was different from other places. After crossing the Immortal Bridge, the group arrived in front of the main building of Penglai Pavilion. Li Yundong looked up and saw a pavilion standing at the top of Dan Cliff. This pavilion was about 15 meters high, facing south. It was a double-story wooden structure. The pavilion was surrounded by open corridors for people to climb up and look into the distance. A golden plaque was hanging in the middle of the pavilion. It was the calligraphy of Qing Dynasty calligrapher Tai Bao, Penglai Pavilion, these 3 strong and powerful characters. The east and west walls of the pavilion were hung with poems by famous scholars of various dynasties, and they were antique and revealed a deep history. Li Yundong looked back and saw that from this angle, he could see that the fairyland in the distance had slowly faded away, as if the 8 immortals had already drifted across the sea and gradually disappeared. Only the rosy clouds were hanging in the sky, and the sea and the sky were colorful and magnificent. It really made people feel a sense of heroism in their hearts when they looked at it for one more time. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh and say, "It's really a blessed land of immortals. No wonder Jinrenyu's cultivation is so high at such a young age." Yu Manlu shook his head and said with a smile, "Jinrenli, are you laughing at me? My cultivation is far from yours." Li Yundong naturally knew that he had the good fortune of Renyuan Jindan and Diyuan Jindan, while Yu Manlu had cultivated step by step. If he had cultivated step by step, he might not have been able to reach the Jinshin phase even when he was 30 or 40 years old. However, Yu Manlu looked to be only about 20 years old, but he had already reached the top phase of Yang spirit and was only one step away from the Jinshin phase. Such a cultivation was very rare among the young generation of cultivators in the cultivation world. There was no doubt that this was due to the unique cultivation environment of Penglai. Li Yundong said seriously, "Jinrenyu, don't belittle yourself. Although there is an order to the Tao, there is no time to the Tao. If you get the Tao 10 years earlier, you may not have a higher cultivation than those who get the Tao 10 years later." Yu Manlu suddenly became solemn and bowed to Li Yundong seriously. "Thank you for your guidance, Jinrenli." While they were talking, they had already passed through Penglai Pavilion and arrived at a low courtyard in the backyard. Yu Manlu pushed open a door and said loudly, "Mom, we have guests." A woman's voice came from the room. It was calm and peaceful, making people who heard it feel quiet and peaceful. Li Yundong and the others looked into the room and saw a woman walking out. She was wearing a Taoist robe and looked to be in her 30s. Although she was not beautiful, she had a dignified and noble temperament. The woman glanced around and first looked at Li Yundong. Her eyes lit up and she nodded slightly. Then she looked at Ziyuan and nodded gently. Then her eyes fell on Su Chan, who was next to her. She was stunned for a moment and frowned slightly, but then relaxed again. After the woman finished glancing around, she withdrew her gaze and said to Li Yundong with a smile, "This is Invincible Battler, who is famous all over the world, right? My little Yu has been thinking about you ever since he came back from Mount Longhu. He really admires your amazing cultivation." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Are you the leader of the Penglai sect, Jinren Yuqing?" Yuqing smiled slightly and said, "I don't deserve to be called a Jinren. Our Penglai sect has now been reduced to a small sect. I don't dare to boast in front of Invincible Li at this time." Ziyuan suddenly said, "Jinrenyu, don't be modest. Although the Penglai sect has declined, it may rise one day. Jinrenyu Manlu is young and promising. I think the Penglai sect will grow in his hands." Yu Manlu couldn't help but be overjoyed by Ziyuan's sudden praise. His face was flushed and he almost scratched his ears and cheeks. "Mom, did you hear that? I'm still very good. You keep saying that I'm useless all day long." Yu Qing pretended to be angry and glared at him. "Jinren, Ziyuan is being polite to you. You really took it seriously." As she spoke, Yu Qing smiled at Ziyuan and said, "Jinren Ziyuan, I haven't thanked you for saving you in Mount Longhu last time. I just don't know what you need my help with this time." Seeing that Yu Qing was so open, Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong and motioned for Li Yundong to speak. Li Yundong understood and said to Yu Qing, "Jinrenyu, to tell you the truth, we did come here this time to ask for your help." Yu Qing chuckled and said, "Jinrenli, you're too polite. If you have something to say, just say it. I'm very grateful for your help in Mount Longhu. If it weren't for the elixirs of the Lingong sect, Mayu wouldn't have recovered so quickly." Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, said with a smile, "Jinrenyu is the one being polite. Even if I didn't help, there would have been cultivators from other sections, I just happened to be there." Yu Qing shook her head and said with a chuckle, "That's not necessarily true. Now, although all the sects seem to be courteous to each other on the surface, they are secretly scheming and undermining each other." When Ziyuan heard Yu Qing's words, there was a trace of resentment hidden in her tone. She couldn't help but be slightly stunned, but she didn't take it to heart. She just smiled slightly and didn't answer. At this time, Li Yundong said, "Jinrenyu, we heard that the Penglai sect is good at repairing powerful magical weapons. I wonder if this unique skill has been passed down?" Yu Qing's expression suddenly changed and she looked at Li Yundong with vigilance. "Jinrenli, where did you hear about this?" Seeing Yu Qing's hostility rise in an instant, Ziyuan immediately said, "Jinrenyu, my master told me. If it's inconvenient, just pretend that we didn't ask about it." Yu Qing glanced at Yu Manlu, who was at the side. Yu Manlu nodded in acknowledgement and walked out. He seemed to be inspecting the surroundings to see if anyone was approaching. Yu Qing thought for a while and sighed in a low voice, "I'm really sorry for being rude. Jinrenli, do you know why our Penglai sect has declined to this state? It's because our Penglai sect is proficient in this technique." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Why is that?" Yu Qing smiled bitterly and said, Powerful magical weapons are the personal weapons of cultivators. If they are damaged, then this powerful magical weapon will be useless, and the strength of cultivators will also be reduced by more than half. If we want to refine it again, it will take a lot of manpower and material resources. Therefore, the 27th sect leader of the Penglai sect was determined to study the repair of powerful magical weapons. Later, 3 successive sect leaders devoted their energy to it, causing the power of the sect to stagnate. When they developed this technology, the pattern of the cultivation world had completely changed. Jinrenli, think about it. If the powerful magical weapons of all the cultivation sects in the world are broken, they can only be eliminated and wasted. Only the powerful magical weapons of our Penglai sect are not afraid of being damaged. They can be repaired and reused. Don't you think the other sects are jealous? This is a case of an innocent man getting into trouble because of his wealth. Li Yundong was cautious and didn't answer, but he remained silent. Yu Qing sighed. Yu Qing saw that Li Yundong didn't say anything, but she didn't care. She continued, "Later, all the sects in the cultivation world attacked us together. Some people even took advantage of the situation and threatened us to hand over the secret skills of our Penglai sect. After so many years, our Penglai sect has been passed down from generation to generation. It has long been claimed that this secret skill has been lost, but only a few people know that this secret skill still exists in the world. Wang Yuanshan is one of them. Fortunately, you heard it from him, otherwise." Yu Qing glanced at Yu Manlu outside the door with a bitter smile and said, "Otherwise I would have to flee with my son." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Jinrenyu, you don't have to do this. I still believe that there is justice in the world. The world is big, but the word reason is the most important. Some people can rely on their strength and run amok for a while, but they can never run amok for a lifetime." Yu Qing bowed slightly and praised, "Amit Ba Jinrenli, well said. What powerful magical weapon do you want to repair this time?" Li Yundong took out the sky-reaching glass mirror and the purple gold jade plate from his arms and presented them to her with both hands. "These are the 2 powerful magical weapons." Yu Qing glanced at them and was shocked. She cried out involuntarily, "Aren't these the powerful magical weapons of the Linggong sect, the sky-reaching glass mirror and the purple gold jade plate? You want to repair these 2 powerful magical weapons?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes." Yu Qing's expression changed. She looked at Li Yundong and the others with flickering eyes, gritted her teeth and shook her head resolutely. "No, absolutely not." Li Yundong was shocked. "What?" Chapter 743. Outside the door, although Yu Manlu had been looking around vigilantly, a large part of his attention was also focused on the room, wanting to hear what was being said inside. When he heard Yu Qing's resolute refusal, he couldn't help poking his head in from the door of the room and shouting, "Mom, why not? In any case, they are the people who saved me." Yu Qing glared at him and shouted sternly, "This is none of your business. Get out." Hearing this, Yu Manlu was stunned and immediately retracted his head dejectedly. Yu Qing sighed and said to Li Yundong and Ziyuan with a helpless expression, "Jinren Li, Jinren Ziyuan, it's not that I'm ruthless, nor that I don't care about your feelings. It's just that if you want to repair other powerful magical weapons, you can't repair these 2. Li Yundong was not a fool, so he quickly responded, "You mean?" Yu Qing nodded and said with a wry smile, "At the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect, thousands of cultivators from all sects saw Jinren Ziyuan take out these 2 damaged powerful magical weapons. But if someone finds out that these 2 powerful magical weapons have suddenly been repaired, and the only sect in the world that can repair powerful magical weapons is our Penglai sect, and we have been spreading the word that this unique skill has been lost, what do you think they will think? As the saying goes, a wise man will make a mistake." Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other. They had thought a lot before, but this was the only thing they hadn't thought about. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and couldn't find an excuse to persuade her for a while. At this time Ziyuan said, "Jinrenyu, we don't want to repair these powerful magical weapons for the future inauguration ceremony, but for subduing demons. We need to use these 2 powerful magical weapons." Yu Qing asked curiously, "Subduing demons?" Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, "Yes, we have a friend who is possessed by a demon. We need these 2 powerful magical weapons to keep her divine sense and memory. Jinrenyu, don't worry. After you repair these 2 powerful magical weapons, we will definitely not use them in front of everyone so as to cause you trouble." Yu Qing pondered. Although she was a little tempted, this matter was too risky, so she didn't dare to make up her mind for a while. Li Yundong and the others also knew that this matter was very important, and it was very likely to cause a terrible disaster for Yu Qing, so they all remained silent and did not speak. After a long while Yu Qing raised her head and stared at Li Yunyang, saying, "Jinren, do you swear that you will never use this powerful magical weapon in front of outsiders? You won't leak this information?" Li Yunyang said with a solemn face, "Jinren, don't worry. I swear to heaven that if I leak this news, let me die under the thunder." This oath could be said to be the most severe oath for cultivators, and cultivators also believed in karma, so naturally no one would casually make such a vicious oath. Hearing Li Yundong's words, Yu Qing breathed a sigh of relief. She nodded to Li Yundong with a smile and said, "Well, Jinren Ziyuan, wait here for a while. I'll be back soon." As she said this, she bowed to Li Yundong and the others, turned around and walked out of the room, walking into the depths of the backyard. Seeing that Yu Qing had agreed, Li Yundong immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled at Ziyuan, then turned to Su Chan, who had been silent for a long time, and said with a smile, "What are you thinking about? Why haven't I seen you speak?" Su Chan pouted and said, "It's not that I don't want to talk, but that leader Yu doesn't care about me at all." Li Yundong smiled, rubbed the little girl's head and said, "You're too beautiful. I don't want to talk to you, okay?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong. "Sister Ziyuan is also very beautiful. Don't comfort me. I know that I'm a fox spirit and not everyone likes me as much as you do. Don't worry, I'm fine. If I were sad because of the discrimination of the world, I would have died of depression long ago." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "That's right. It's good that you can understand." The two of them laughed and talked, but Yu Manlu, who was outside the room, felt upset. He admired Ziyuan very much in his heart, but he also knew that he and Ziyuan were like heaven and earth. He was completely unworthy of her, so he gave up this idea. Instead, he wholeheartedly wanted to matchmake Li Wudi, whom he admired the most, with Ziyuan, the immortal whom he admired the most. At this time, when he saw Li Yundong and Su Chan talking intimately, he began to have the idea of breaking them up. Soon he had an idea. He walked in and said to Su Chan with a smile, "Jinren Su, is this your first time in Penglai?" Su Chan hadn't expected that Yu Manlu would suddenly take the initiative to greet her. She felt strange, but she still said politely, "Yes, Jinren Yu, do you want to be my tour guide?" Su Chan's words were originally polite, but she hadn't expected that Yu Manlu would immediately take advantage of the situation and say, "Well, the evening scenery of our Penglai mountain is the most charming. Why don't you come with me to have a look around?" Su Chan was stunned and thought to herself, "This Yu Manlu is really good at climbing up." I casually greeted him and he climbed up. Su Chan turned to look at Li Yundong helplessly and said, "Yundong, are you going with me?" Li Yundong was thinking about Yu Qing. He knew that if he left Ziyuan here alone, it would be a little inappropriate. However, at this time they were asking for help, and it was a little inappropriate to refuse Yu Manlu's kindness. He could only smile at Su Chan and say, "I won't go. You can go with Jinren Yu and have a look. It's not a wasted trip to the fairyland on Earth." Su Chan had no choice but to reluctantly smile at Yu Manlu and say, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Jinren Yu. I hope you won't find me annoying." Although Yu Manlu disliked Su Chan's fox demon body, Su Chan's stunning beauty was not something he could resist. Although Su Chan's smile was a little forced, Yu Manlu was still stunned. His eyes widened and he was stunned. After a while, he suddenly came to his senses and immediately rushed in front of Su Chan, not daring to look at her again. Li Yundong watched Su Chan and Yu Manlu leave. He smiled slightly and said to Ziyuan, "If things are settled later, let's go and have a look around." Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Okay." The two of them waited quietly in the room for Yu Qing, but after waiting for a long time, Yu Qing didn't come back. Li Yundong was slightly surprised and said, "Why hasn't Leader Yu come back yet?" Although Ziyuan also had some doubts in her heart, she still advised, "Maybe Leader Yu has something to prepare. After all, repairing powerful magical weapons is not like other things. It must be quite complicated." The two of them waited for a while. More than an hour had passed. It was already dark outside and the sun had completely set. However, Yu Qing was still nowhere to be seen. At this time, Li Yundong finally felt that something was wrong. He turned to Ziyuan and said, "Something's wrong. There's no reason to be gone for so long." Ziyuan also frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Yes. What did Leader Yu go to do?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said seriously, "No, let's go in and have a look." Ziyuan also nodded. Okay. The two of them turned and walked out of the room, following the path that Yu Qing had taken before to the depths of the inner courtyard. In the depths of the inner courtyard of Penglai Pavilion, there was a rather ordinary courtyard. The periphery was surrounded by a wall with white walls and black tiles. The wall was about 2 meters high, and there were round arches and all kinds of exquisite windows on the wall. Further inside was a quadrangle-style corridor. There were many red pillars in the corridor, and the calligraphy was adjacent. In the depths of the corridor, there was an arch hidden in the jungle. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan stepped on the cobblestone path and walked along it. However, the more they walked, the more they felt that something was wrong. When they looked at the inner courtyard from the outside, it didn't seem big. It only covered an area of 1 or 2,000 square meters. However, after walking for more than 10 minutes, they still hadn't reached the end. Li Yundong couldn't help but stop and ask curiously, "That's not right. Why is the inner courtyard so big?" Zi Yuan looked around and suddenly pulled Li Yundong's arm. She pointed to the side and said, "Li Yundong, look." Li Yundong looked around in the darkness and saw that he was in a zigzag corridor. There were many calligraphy paintings hanging on the wall, and one of them was written with a poem by Su Dongpa. "The eastern sea of clouds is empty, and the immortals appear and disappear. Shaking the world and giving birth to all things, how can there be a palace where a sparrow hides a pearl?" Li Yundong was stunned. "What's wrong with this poem?" Zi Yuan said in a deep voice, "When we passed by here before, I noticed that this is the poem hanging here." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he said in a low voice, "You mean, we are trapped here by an illusion?" Zi Yuan frowned slightly. She naturally knew that the illusion technique that could trap two masters like them was no trivial matter. She lowered her voice and said, "Li Yundong, why don't you go east and give it a try?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw a wall on the east side. He was stunned and said, "This is a dead end." "How?" Before he could finish his words, he immediately reacted and cast a look of appreciation at Zi Yuan. "Good idea." Li Yundong took a slight breath, walked to the wall and pushed it with his palm. With a loud bang, a big hole was opened in the wall and he stepped in. Li Yundong looked around and saw that he was surrounded by a bamboo forest. The scenery was strange. Obviously he had never been here before. Li Yundong laughed and gave Zi Yuan a thumbs up. "Let's go, we found the way." The two of them continued to walk along the bamboo path. But after walking for about 10 minutes, Li Yundong and Zi Yuan suddenly saw a zigzag corridor in front of them. The entrance was exactly the same as the one they had seen before. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other, and an ominous feeling rose in their hearts. They quickly rushed inside and saw that there was a wall hanging with Su Dongpa's poem that they had seen before. Li Yundong frowned and said in a low voice, "Damn it, we're really trapped in there. Zi Yuan, your cultivation is higher than mine now. Why don't you fly up and have a look?" But not long after, she appeared again. As soon as she saw Li Yundong, she was slightly surprised, but then she calmed down and shook her head. "No, if I fly up there, there will be a fog. I can't see my fingers in front of me and I can't see anything." Li Yundong asked, "How far are you going?" Zi Yuan said, "No, I tried just now. I just flew in the direction of Tianan City. At my speed, I would have gone out of Penglai in a few minutes, but when I landed, I still landed beside you." Li Yundong took a deep breath and said, "What a powerful illusion. Who is tricking us? Is it Yu Qing?" Zi Yuan turned her head and looked around. Even though she was usually calm, she couldn't help but feel a little flustered at this time. She whispered, "It can't be, right? However, this illusion is really powerful. Could it be that this Penglai immortal realm is going to become the Penglai desperation?" Li Yundong looked around at the dark night and felt that there seemed to be a pair of eyes staring at him in the dark night. Even though Li Yundong's cultivation was high and he was knowledgeable, he couldn't help but feel creepy at this time. There seemed to be an invisible hand pressing down on him, covering the sky and the earth. Chapter 744. It was past 7 o'clock in the evening. Although it was already dark, Penglai Pavilion was shrouded in a dark yellow light. This light was projected from the artificial light on the opposite cliff. Penglai Pavilion, with its ancient city walls and cornices, was shrouded in this slightly cold light. It was faintly discernible, gloomy, and particularly mysterious, gloomy, dignified, and vicissitudes of life. Many tourists who were visiting Penglai Island did not choose to leave. Many people gathered in the distance of Penglai Pavilion and took pictures of this historical scene on their mobile phones or cameras. However, none of them knew that in the depths of this mysterious building, two top cultivators of the younger generation in the cultivation world were trapped in this ancient building complex. A powerful and unknown illusory technique had left them in a terrible state of anxiety and helplessness. Li Yundong had fought with the great Onmyoji Buri, who was proficient in illusion, and had also experienced the power of illusion. The so-called illusion, as the name implied, was the art of illusion. As long as one's willpower was strong and his cultivation was profound, he could not be confused by the illusion. This was the so-called guarding the soul, and no evil could invade. However, when the illusion reached the highest level, it could make the illusion real, trap people in it, and make it difficult for them to escape. Li Yundong took a deep breath in place. He looked around and suppressed a trace of impatience and ominous thoughts in his heart. He said in a low voice, "Let's walk around again. You pay attention to the surroundings and see if there is anything special. It's impossible for such a large-scale illusion to have no flaws. In my opinion, it's better to choose a direction and continue walking. If we find something wrong, we can change direction." Ziyuan nodded and said in a low voice, "Although this method is a little stupid, there is no better way than this now." Li Yundong and Ziyuan carefully changed their direction and broke through the wall as usual. However, after going around for a while, they returned to the zigzag corridor. Li Yundong saw Su Dongpa's poem hanging on the wall and frowned. He immediately turned around and changed his direction, going back the way they had come. However, after walking for a while, they had unknowingly circled back here. Li Yundong and Ziyuan repeated this more than a dozen times. Every time they broke through the wall and went out, they could find that the scenery was different from before. But no matter how they circled around, they would eventually circle back to this corridor. While the two of them were trapped in this powerful illusion maze, Su Chan and Yu Manlu were walking back along the stone road of Penglai Pavilion. Yu Manlu looked at Su Chan, who was walking in front of him, and suddenly said, "Jinren Su, we can go back." At that moment, Su Chan turned her head around, revealing her beautiful face. The neon lights of the night shone on her cheeks, making her look even more beautiful. She suddenly smiled. "Thank God," she said. "Finally I can go back. I thought we were going to circle around here till morning." Yu Manlu's heart was pounding because of the flirtatiousness of Su Chan's smile. He quickly looked away, coughed dryly, calmed down and said, "Jinren Su, you must be joking." Su Chan looked at him curiously and asked, "You're so strange. Why did you call me Jinren? This is the first time I've heard someone call me Sage Su." Yu Manlu said awkwardly, "Then what should I call you?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Su Chan or anything else. It doesn't matter, but you're not allowed to call me Chick or Chaner. Only Yundong can call me that." Yu Manlu touched his nose, feeling a little embarrassed. He didn't know how to reply to Su Chan's words. He thought for a moment and suddenly asked, "Su Chan, I'm very curious. Has anyone ever said that you are a witch?" After he finished speaking, he immediately realized that something was wrong and quickly explained, "I was just curious. I didn't mean to offend you." Su Chan said disapprovingly, "Of course there are. Many cultivators from famous sects have pointed at my nose and called me a witch." As she said this, she turned to look at Yu Manlu and smiled. "Do you think so too?" Yu Manlu quickly waved his hand, but soon he lowered his head awkwardly and said with some embarrassment, "Actually, I thought so at first, but now I think that some rumors may not live up to their name." Su Chan giggled and said, "It's nothing. I just want to be happy with Yundong. I don't care what other people say." Yu Manlu raised his head and suddenly looked at Su Chan with envy. He admired her courage to love and hate. For a moment he put aside his prejudices and began to talk and laugh with Su Chan. They returned along the way. When they reached the depths of the backyard, Su Chan was suddenly stunned. She raised her head and her sinuses moved slightly. "Strange, there seems to be the smell of blood." Yu Manlu stopped and asked curiously, "The smell of blood? I don't smell it. What you smell is the smell of the sea, right? This is the sea, so it's normal to smell this." Su Chan was suspicious in her heart, but after listening to Yu Manlu's explanation, she couldn't help but be a little shaken for a moment. She thought for a moment, put this thought aside for the time being and continued to follow Yu Manlu inside. After walking for a while, Yu Manlu saw a room with a light on. He immediately smiled, pointed to a standing figure in the light and said with a smile, "Over there. Let's go. Do you want to see how my mother repairs powerful magical weapons?" Su Chan's nostrils twitched violently as she walked over. The smell of blood in the air was getting stronger and stronger, and the suspicions in her heart were getting stronger and stronger. But since Yu Manlu had invited her so warmly, Su Chan couldn't refuse. She could only raise her guard and carefully follow behind him. Yu Manlu walked to the house with black tiles and white walls, and knocked on the door with a smile. "Mom, can I come in?" But there was silence in the room. Su Chan suddenly said in a low voice, "Leader, you may be busy. Why don't we come back later?" Yumanlu turned back and smiled at Su-chan. "No need. Ordinary people can't see how powerful magical weapons are repaired. I was also surprised to see it for the first time. It's okay. Let's go in and have a look." Yumanlu turned his head to talk to Su-chan as he pushed the door open. But when he turned his head, his eyes suddenly widened, and the pupils in his eyes instantly shrank. In front of him, Yu Qing was leaning against an antique bookshelf, her body motionless. She looked up at the sky, her eyes bulging and her mouth wide open. Dark red blood was slowly flowing out of her mouth, eyes, nose and ears. Her Adam's apple bobbed up and down, making the sound of swallowing blood. Her chest had sunken severely, as if someone had used a large iron hammer to ruthlessly strike it. A sharp and long steel nail was nailed into the Huagai acupoint on her chest where her wound was. Blood dripped from the leg of her Taoist robe, flowing down her feet. The dark red blood slowly spread on the ground, like a ghost, step by step, crawling towards the door. In an instant, Yumanlu and Su-chan's minds went blank. Yumanlu's mouth was wide open and he was about to let out a scream of horror, but suddenly, a black shadow flashed in the corner of the room with a whoosh. The momentum of this black shadow was extremely ferocious, and all the books and papers in the room were sent flying in all directions. Yumanlu only saw the black shadow pouncing in front of him in the blink of an eye, and a black palm slapped towards his face. The palm grew larger and larger, and in the blink of an eye, it covered his entire vision. Su-chan, who was standing to one side, was already vigilant. Although she was shocked by Yu Qing's tragic situation for a moment, she still reacted very quickly. Without thinking, she immediately reached out and grabbed Yumanlu, pulling him to her side. Yumanlu tilted his head. Although the palm did not directly hit his face, it still brushed past his cheek. It was just a brush, but Yumanlu felt as if his head had been hit by a high-speed train. He was so painful that he was about to let out a scream, but the person's palm suddenly turned and slapped him on the neck. With a crack, Yumanlu's head tilted and fell on his shoulder. Su-chan, who was standing to one side, suddenly had a fierce look in her eyes. She shouted, and her 5 fingers were like hooks, grabbing at the black shadow in front of her. At this time, Su-chan was already a 7-tailed fox spirit. Her 5 fingers were like hooks, and if this extremely angry claw hit, even steel would be crushed into a ball of flour by her. Seeing the fierce claw, the black shadow retreated in an instant. At this time, Yumanlu's body also fell to the ground with a thud, his whole body twitching. Seeing his current situation, Su-chan hurriedly said, "Jinrenyu, quick, yang spirit out of your body." At this time, Yumanlu was still breathing. With a thought, as soon as the yang spirit came out of his body, he immediately looked around. For a moment he couldn't see the black shadow, so he immediately rushed to Yu Qing like a gust of wind and cried loudly, "Mom, how are you?" "Mom? Oh, who did this to you?" Yu Qing was still breathing. She wanted to lower her head to take another look at her son, but she couldn't move her head. She could only raise her finger slightly and point to a place on the bookshelf beside her. At this time, Yumanlu's eyes were all focused on his mother's chest. He loudly urged Yu Qing to quickly use the yang spirit, so he didn't notice Yu Qing's gesture at all. However, Su-chan, who was standing to one side, saw it at a glance. Following her gesture, she saw a thin, ancient thread-bound book on the bookshelf. She swept to the side of the bookshelf and saw a few small seal characters written on the book. It was the secret method of patching heaven. Su-chan took the book and hurriedly rushed to Yu Qing and asked, "Leader Yu, do you want this?" At this time Yu Qing couldn't speak, nor could she make any expression. Even moving her fingers just now had consumed all her remaining strength. Her throat rolled twice, making 2 strange gurgling sounds, and then she swallowed her last breath. Yumanlu watched his mother die in front of him. He cried in grief and said loudly, "Mom, why don't you use the yang spirit to go out of your body?" Su-chan tried to persuade him in a low voice, "Leader Yu has a soul-locking nail nailed to her chest. She can't go out of her body even if she wants to." Yumanlu's eyes turned red. He immediately reached out to grab the soul-locking nail that had penetrated his bones and pulled it out forcefully. With a puff sound, a stream of blood spurted out and splashed on Su-chan. At this time, a golden light slowly surged out of Yu Qing's body and gradually gathered together, forming Yu Qing's original appearance. Yumanlu was overjoyed. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw a black shadow flash and slapped the golden light. Then another palm slapped toward him. The power of this palm was much greater than before. Yumanlu wanted to turn his yang spirit into countless clones and flee in all directions, but he felt that he was enveloped by the other party's incomparably powerful force, and he couldn't move at all. Even Su Chan, who was standing to one side, had no time to react. She could only watch helplessly as the young spirits of Yu Manlu and Yu Qing were shattered by the black shadow in an instant. Then, the black shadow took a deep breath, and the glittering golden fragments were sucked into his stomach in one breath and disappeared. Su Chan knew that this time Yu Manlu and Yu Qing were really dead. They didn't even have the chance to be reincarnated. This was no small matter. At this time, the black shadow suddenly turned around, opened its 5 fingers and grabbed the secret method of heaven patching in Su Chan's hand. Chapter 745. Su Chan saw that the black shadow's palm was not as powerful as the previous 2 palms. Obviously, he was worried that if he used too much strength he would tear the book apart, so he didn't use all his strength. Therefore, she was not shrouded by the gang wind that the other party had exerted with all his strength for a while. Su Chan was quick to react. She hid the secret method of heaven patching in her arms, turned her head and wanted to run away. But as soon as she moved, she felt a gust of gang wind coming from behind. Su Chan gritted her teeth and gathered all her jinchi on her back, ready to take the palm. With a muffled sound, Su Chan felt that the man's palm had hit her back, but the moment it touched her body, the force was reduced by more than half. Even so, she was still sent flying and fell to the ground. Su Chan felt that all the bones in her body were cracking, as if they had been broken by the other party. Her qi and blood were surging, and her blood vessels were like countless fine needles exploding. Her body felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and she was so numb that she couldn't move. The girl gritted her teeth and forced herself to run qi. She quickly turned around and held up an ancient threaded book. She gritted her teeth and activated her jinchi, immediately shredding the book into countless pieces. For a moment, the room was filled with shreds of paper, obscuring everyone's sight. In the previous few exchanges, the other party had come and gone too quickly. Neither the dead Yu Manlu nor the injured Su Chan had been able to see the other party's appearance clearly. At this time, Su Chan looked carefully and saw that the other party was hiding in a dark corner, only revealing a pair of eyes that were as sharp as knives and staring at her. Su Chan looked at the man without showing any weakness. She laughed angrily and said, "I've destroyed the secret method of heaven patching. Kill me. Yun Zhan will avenge me." The black shadow's eyes suddenly became extremely sharp. He moved like a black bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, he pounced on Su Chan and slapped down angrily. Su Chan's heart sank and she closed her eyes in despair. She knew that this person's cultivation was too terrifying. At the very least, he was a master of thunder retribution. The most terrifying thing was that his gang wind was extremely fierce, not inferior to Li Yundong's at all. His figure was as fast as lightning, like a ghost. Even if Li Yundong's Jinshin was at its peak, the outcome of the battle would be uncertain, not to mention that Li Yundong was only in the Yangshin phase. Even if Li Yundong and Zi Yuan arrived in time, they would only be courting death. Therefore, Su Chan did not cry for help from beginning to end. She just gritted her teeth and fought. But when she wanted to escape, it was too late. Su Chan closed her eyes tightly, waiting for the man to slap her on the head with the force of Mount Tai. Suddenly she thought, if I die, what will happen to Yun Zhan? The little girl's heart tightened and her body began to tremble uncontrollably. But after waiting for a while, she did not see any movement. Su Chan mustered up her courage and opened her eyes slightly, only to see that there was no one in front of her. The ferocious shadow from before had disappeared. Only Yu Qing's body was in the room, slowly sliding down from one side of the bookshelf and sitting down. At this time, Su Chan quickly rushed to Yu Manlu and Yu Qing. She looked at Yu Qing and then at Yu Manlu. Subconsciously, she wanted to help them, but as soon as she stretched out her hand, she remembered that their young spirits had been destroyed. Even if their bodies were still alive at this time, they would just be in a vegetative state. Su Chan couldn't bear it. She remembered that Yu Manlu, who had been talking and laughing with her a moment ago, had been destroyed in body and soul. He would never be able to live again. She felt a burst of heartache. The little girl's tears unconsciously fell, but as soon as her tears fell to the ground, she suddenly heard a middle-aged man's voice coming from outside. "Qing Lu, are you there?" As he spoke, the middle-aged man smiled and said to the person beside him, "How did Master Wan know that I would spend the night at school today?" "Aha, no matter what, Master Wan is here today. What a rare guest. I'll ask Qinger to cook a few dishes later. I want to toast Master Wan." When Su Chan heard this voice, her face suddenly changed. Just as she was about to escape, she saw that the two people had already appeared at the door. Su Chan turned her head and saw a middle-aged man talking with Wang Jinyuan, the leader of the Gizao sect, with a smile. At this time, Wang Jinyuan had already seen her at a glance, and his eyes suddenly flashed. At this time, the middle-aged man who was turning his head to look at Wang Jinyuan saw that Wang Jinyuan's expression was not right. He turned his head to look into the room and said with a smile, "Qing'er look, hook." As he was speaking, he suddenly saw the terrible scene in the room. The smile on his face suddenly froze and his whole body seemed to be frozen. This man was none other than Yu Qing's husband and Yu Manlu's father. The Penglai sect had been passed down to this day, and Yu Qing was the only direct descendant of the sect. Yu Qing herself was a woman. It could be said that if she found a man with another surname, unless the other party married into her family, the bloodline of the leader of the Yu family would be completely severed. However, it was very difficult for a man to marry into her family in Shandong. Even if a man was willing, Yu Qing would not like it. Because of this, after thinking about it, Yu Qing simply found a man who was not a cultivator at all. This man also had the same surname as her, and his name was Yu Tian. He was an honest teacher in Penglai City. Although Yu Qing was not beautiful, she had an outstanding temperament and was overflowing with talent. In the end, she married the unattractive and ordinary Yu Tian, which made the teachers of the school very surprised. Because of this, Yu Tian doted on his wife very much, and Yu Qing also let her son continue to have the surname Yu, which could be considered as taking the edge of the bloodline. After the two young couple with the surname Yu got married, their days were sweet and beautiful. Although Yu Tian did not cultivate himself, under the influence of Yu Qing, he also began to become interested in self-cultivation. After observing for a period of time, Yu Qing simply began to teach her husband the art of cultivation. At this time, the family of three could be considered cultivators. However, Yu Youqian's cultivation was relatively late, and his cultivation was not high. After 10 years of cultivation, he was only at the 5th layer of heaven, the Shintong realm. He was not as powerful as his son, and Yu Tian was not considered a direct disciple of the Penglai sect. He was only a registered disciple. However, Yu Tian was indifferent to fame and fortune, and he did not care about these things at all. After learning to cultivate, he became Taoist companions with his wife, and life became more and more interesting. But he never thought that a sudden disaster would suddenly befall him. His wife died tragically in front of him, and his son was lying in a pool of blood, without any signs of life. A blissful family was shattered in an instant. Yu Youqian's eyes suddenly widened so much that they almost split open. After a moment of shock, he suddenly rushed in front of Yu Qing like a madman, hugged his wife and let out a beast-like roar. This teacher with a pair of black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose had a ferocious and terrifying face, like that of a devil. Yu Tian glared at Su Chan and roared hysterically, "You're the one who killed Qing'er. You killed Lu." Su Chan was stunned with fear. Her face was pale, and she was about to defend herself when she saw Wang Jinyuan squat down to check Yu Qing and Yu Manlu. He suddenly pointed at her and said sternly, "You witch, why did you come here in the middle of the night? What's the matter with the blood on your body? Their bodies are still warm. It can be seen that you have just committed the murder and haven't had time to escape, right?" Su Chan's head buzzed. She had been pointed at and called a witch many times, but this was the most difficult one for her. She stared at Wang Jinyuan with her eyes wide open, only to see a sinister smile on the corner of his mouth. Her heart shook and a thought flashed through her mind like lightning. "No, this is a trap." Su Chan jumped up in fright and quickly explained, "No, I didn't kill them. It was someone else." Wang Jinyuan said sternly, "Someone else? Where is he? We didn't see anyone along the way just now." Look at Yu Qing and Yu Manlu's posture, and then look at the scene. It's obvious that an acquaintance did it, and they didn't resist at all. Su Chan was shocked and angry. "I didn't. It's also my first time here." Wang Jinyuan immediately said aggressively, "Is this your first time here? Why are you here?" Su Chan subconsciously wanted to blurt out Li Yundong's name, but when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she immediately swallowed them back. Her heart was tight. She knew that this must be a trap. If she told Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, they would definitely be implicated. Su Chan immediately swallowed her words and said loudly, "I didn't kill them. Whether you believe it or not, I didn't kill them." At this time Yu Tian roared sternly, "Then who is it? Tell me, tell me." Su Chan was speechless for a moment. She closed her mouth tightly and stopped talking. She looked left and right, trying to find a way to escape. Yu Tian had been misled by Wang Jinyuan and had long regarded Su Chan as a murderer. At this time, when he saw Su Chan like this, he was even more certain that she was the murderer. Yu Tian let out a roar and lunged at Su Chan like a madman. He had cultivated for 10 years, and although his cultivation level was not high, he was furious. He gnashed his teeth so hard that blood seeped out of the corners of his eyes. His teeth creaked, and his gums bit so hard that his mouth was full of blood. Yu Tian chased after Su Chan like a mad tiger and attacked her fiercely. Su Chan couldn't fight back, so she was chased around by Yu Tian. At this time, a shout suddenly came from not far away, "Chaner, where are you?" Su Chan was shocked. She could tell that it was Li Yundong's voice, but she didn't dare to answer. She moved and quickly rushed in Li Yundong's direction. At this time, Wang Jinyuan grabbed Yu Tian, who was about to chase after her, and said anxiously, "Jinrenyu, calm down." Yu Tian roared like a madman, "Let me go. I'm going to kill her and avenge my wife and son." Wang Jinyuan said quickly, "Jinrenyu, do you know who is standing behind this demoness? It's super battler Li Wudi. You're no match for him and I'm no match for him either. As long as there's life, there's hope. Let's hurry up and leave. Don't be silenced." Yu Tian's eyes were as fierce as those of a demon. The blue veins at the corners of his eyes bulged, and he gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. His whole body trembled violently, and his chest rose and fell a few times. He turned his head heavily and quickly fled into the distance. Wang Jinyuan turned his head and glanced at Li Yunyang, who was rushing over. He chuckled and chased after Yu Tian. Yu Tian ran until he had almost used up all of his Zhenyuan and strength. Only then did he stop. He looked around and found himself in a desolate mountain range. The bright moon in the sky looked down at him coldly. It was a dark and windy night, silent and gloomy. Yu Tian thought of his dead wife and son. For a moment he was so sad that he couldn't help crying. Wang Jinyuan, who had rushed over, did not fan the flames. He just quietly accompanied him. At this time his goal had been achieved. He calmed down and thought of Yu Qing's tragic situation. Wang Jinyuan couldn't help but sigh softly. He patted Yu Tian on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Jinrenyu, death is like a lamp going out. Get over it." Yu Tian suddenly turned his head and said, "Get over it? How can I get over it? Tell me. Who is this Li Wudi? What's his relationship with the murderer?" Wang Jinyuan sighed softly and said, "Jinrenyu, to be honest, Super Li is the most powerful person in the cultivation world today. Even I, the leader of the Gizao sect, don't dare to provoke him." You are still?" Yu Tian bellowed in rage. What did you say? Is it true that only those with big fists can live in this world? Is there no justice in this world? I don't believe that there is no justice in this world. I don't believe that no one in this world can help me take revenge." As he spoke, Yu Tian's whole body trembled. He clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles cracked, and the black hair on his head stood up. He raised his head to the sky, like an extremely angry beast, and roared carefully, "If I don't take revenge, I swear I'm not a human being." Well, some readers enthusiastically pointed out the bug that Ziyuan couldn't speak Japanese. In fact, you might as well go back and read chapter 495. There is a chapter about the Taoist assembly that says, "The three Japanese were whispering." Ziyuan, who was beside them, heard their words and couldn't help looking at them again and frowning. Li Yundong was keenly aware of her strangeness, so he asked, "Ziyuan, what's wrong?" Ziyuan thought for a moment and said to Li Yundong in a low voice, "It's nothing. These Japanese look down on us cultivators." From this paragraph, it can be seen that Ziyuan actually understood Japanese. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to understand what these Japanese were saying. The reason why she didn't tell Li Yundong was that she was afraid that he would be impulsive and cause trouble. This paragraph is actually a very secret setting that I buried at the beginning, but I didn't write it clearly at the beginning. In my setting, Ziyuan is actually very proficient in Japanese. At the Taoist assembly, I already had a clear setting in my heart. However, maybe because the time span is too long and the length is too long, I really don't remember whether there is a paragraph that Ziyuan doesn't understand Japanese. If there is, please point it out. It should be my negligence. I will go back and change it. After all, this book has been written for almost a year. It's normal for some things to be wrong. I welcome readers to point out this kind of bug. Of course, if there is no bug, then the part about Ziyuan being proficient in Japanese should not be a bug. There was a very hidden explanation before. But it doesn't matter. I have always changed this kind of thing. I welcome everyone to point out my mistakes. I just need to pay a little attention to my words. Ah. Chapter 746. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, who were trapped in the illusion, had no idea that a terrible disaster was about to befall them. When the two of them turned to the zigzag corridor for the nth time, Li Yundong finally couldn't help sighing and saying, "Well, I admit defeat. This illusion maze is too powerful. Who put it here? Why did this person want to trap us here?" Zi Yuan frowned tightly. She looked around and pondered for a moment before saying, "The most powerful illusions in the world are the Maoshan sect of China and the Yin-Yang sect of Japan. In addition, the illusions of Xingyi school and Xingyan Tantrism are also very powerful, but I remember that there is a sect that seems to be famous for its illusions and charm." As Zi Yuan said this, she couldn't help but look at Li Yundong. She didn't tell the truth, but Li Yundong could hear the underlying meaning in her words. A sect famous for its illusions and charm? Who else could it be but the Fox Zen school? Li Yundong's expression was strange for a moment, and he couldn't help muttering in a low voice, "No way? No one from the Fox Zen school would make things difficult for us at this time, right? Could it be Ao Wushuang?" While he was thinking, his eyes suddenly swept around and once again fell on Su Dongpa's poem. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he said in a low voice, "Every illusion has a flaw, and every maze has a formation eye. We walked around and saw countless calligraphy treasures along the way. We passed this corridor countless times. Zi Yuan, why do you think this calligraphy treasure is always hanging here but it is always hanging steadily?" Zi Yuan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She stared at the calligraphy treasure with her eyes wide open, only to see that because they had broken through the walls in all directions of the zigzag corridor, many of the calligraphy treasures had been shaken to the side, but this one had been hanging straight and stable. Zi Yuan's eyes lit up. "Yes, you are so smart. This must be the flaw of the formation eye. Come on, try it." Li Yundong's heart shook, and he quickly walked to the hanging calligraphy. Just as he was about to push it hard, he suddenly found that the air around him suddenly twisted, and the zigzag corridor in front of him and the calligraphy with Su Dongpa's poem suddenly disappeared. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked around in surprise, only to find that they were in front of an empty jungle. There was a solid bluestone floor under their feet. Not far away there were towering trees and a little further away, there was the dark sea hidden in the night. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. "What the hell is this place? How did we get here?" Zi Yuan let out a sigh of relief and said, "It seems that the magic formation suddenly disappeared by itself? No matter what, we can finally taste it." Li Yundong thought for a moment and asked Zi Yuan with some reluctance, "Zi Yuan, do you think this piece of calligraphy just now is the flaw in the formation eye?" Zi Yuan looked at him and suddenly said with a smile, "I don't know. Why don't you ask the person who cast this magic to lock you in again and try again?" Li Yundong shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Forget it. If I go in again the world will be different. Do you think I'm stupid?" Zi Yuan turned her head in the direction of Penglai Pavilion and said, "We don't know how we got here. Let's go back quickly. Su Chan and leader you should be waiting anxiously." Li Yundong nodded. "Well, let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a roar suddenly ring out. It was in the direction where they had met Yu Qing before. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other, and an ominous thought emerged in their hearts at the same time. Zi Yuan knew that her cultivation was higher than Li Yundong's at this time, so she didn't want Li Yundong to rush in front. She moved and immediately rushed in the direction of the sound. Li Yundong followed behind her, shouting as he ran, "Chaner!" His shout spread far away, as if it was going to cross the sea and reach the distant sky. But after he shouted, there was no response from Su Chan. Li Yundong's heart sank, and his face became more and more unsightly. He sped up a little. The two of them moved as fast as lightning. In a few leaps, they arrived at the place where they had been waiting for Yu Qing. Just as they were about to continue running inside, they suddenly saw a figure bump into them. Li Yundong's eyes narrowed. Just by looking at the outline of the figure, he recognized that it was Su Chan. He was overjoyed and shouted, "Chaner? I'm here." Only then did Su Chan suddenly stop, turn her head, and look at Li Yundong in shock. Her eyes were wide open, full of fear and panic as well as the grievance and anger of being wronged. Li Yundong saw that her face was covered in blood and couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He quickly grabbed her hands and explored her body with his jinchi. "What's wrong with you? Where are you hurt? Who hurt you?" Su Chan's body trembled violently. She pulled Li Yundong with both hands, but her eyes looked at Zi Yuan. She said anxiously, "Yundong, Sister Zi Yuan, let's go. Someone framed us." Li Yundong's Jinchi quickly explored Su Chan's body and found that she was indeed not injured. Only then did he feel a little relieved. He held Su Chan's shoulders with both hands and said in a deep voice, "Chan'er, don't worry. What happened?" Su Chan's pretty face was pale, and she said anxiously, "Someone killed Yu Qing and Yu Manlu and wants to frame me?" "What?" Li Yundong and Zi Yuan were shocked at the same time. Zi Yuan took a step forward and said in a shocked voice, "Leader Yu is dead? How did he die? Who did it?" Li Yundong immediately asked in shock, "Someone framed you? Who?" Su Chan quickly shook her head and said, "I don't know. I couldn't see his figure. I only know that this person is very powerful. I didn't even have the strength to resist his palm." As she said this, Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's arm and urged him anxiously, "Yundong, leave quickly. I'm now considered a murderer, but if you are seen by others, you will also be considered an accomplice." Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said angrily, "Nonsense. I'm not afraid of a crooked shadow. I didn't do it, so why should I be afraid of others framing me?" Su Chan stamped her feet and said anxiously, "Yundong. Rumors are a fearful thing. The most terrible thing in the world is not framing with evidence but framing out of thin air. Someone wants to harm us. How can you jump into a trap?" Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and was about to speak when Zi Yuan suddenly asked, "Su Chan, who else was there when you left?" Su Chan turned her face and saw that although Zi Yuan's fists were clenched tightly, her face was still calm. Her eyes were shining with calmness and wisdom, which gradually calmed Su Chan down. Su Chan said quickly, "At that time, a middle-aged man wearing glasses rushed in. He seemed to be Yu Qing's husband and Yu Youtian's father. The other person was Wang Jinyuan, the leader of the Gizao sect. He insisted that I was the murderer, so Yu Youtian also believed it and wanted to kill me like crazy." Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. "Wang Jinyuan? Good. This guy finally showed up again. Very good. It seems that he has cultivated to the Jinshan face. I want to see how much his cultivation has improved one day. How dare he slander me like this?" Zi Yuan knew that Su Chan was Li Yundong's weakness. As long as it was related to Su Chan, Li Yundong would not be able to deal with it calmly. She couldn't help but persuade him, "Li Yundong, calm down. The whole thing is very strange. How could it be possible that as soon as we arrived, someone cast an illusion spell on us and then Yu Qing was killed? And Su Chan happened to be there. Was she framed by this guy? Also, think about it, why did Wang Jinyuan come at this time? Why did he insist that Su Chan was the murderer as soon as he came?" Hearing this, Li Yundong gradually calmed down. He turned his head and said to Su Chan, "Chan'er, don't be afraid. With me here the sky won't fall. I will definitely clear your name. Let's go to the scene and have a look. Maybe we can find something. It's not a good idea for you to just run away like this. Wouldn't it be a good thing for the other party to say that we have a guilty conscience?" Su Chan sighed and said, "But if we go there and are seen by others, they will say that we are going to destroy the corpses." Li Yundong sneered and said, "No matter what, it's still a knife to the head. It's better to go straight forward. Let's go and have a look together." Seeing that she couldn't persuade Li Yundong, Su Chan could only sigh softly and nod. She gently held Li Yundong's hand and nervously and carefully followed behind him. After they arrived at the scene of the murder, Zi Yuan quickly stepped forward. She glanced at Yu Qing and then at Yu Manlu. She suddenly took a deep breath and said, "What a domineering strength. He actually broke the neck of a Yang spirit master with one palm. It's terrible." Li Yundong looked at the blood on the ground and his eyes fell on Yu Qing's face, which had died with a grievance. His heart was heavy and he felt indescribably uncomfortable. At this time, Su Chan suddenly took Li Yundong's hand and whispered, "By the way, Yundong, the murderer who killed Yu Qing and Yu Manlu also wanted to steal the Penglai sect's secret method of mend heaven." Li Yundong was stunned and asked, "The secret method of mend heaven? Is it the ancient book that records the secret method of repairing powerful magical weapons? Where did the murderer see this book? Could it be that the book was in this room at that time?" Su Chan said softly, "At that time, Leader Yu Qing was hit by the murderer, but she didn't die for a while. She pointed at the bookshelf with her finger, and I looked in the direction of her finger so I found the secret method of mend heaven. Later the murderer wanted to steal it so I tore the book into pieces." Li Yundong was silent for a long time. He looked at Zi Yuan and said in a low voice, "It seems that the other party is here to steal the secret method of mend heaven?" Zi Yuan pondered for a while and nodded slowly. "That's possible." Li Yundong sighed and said, "An ordinary man is innocent, but he gets into trouble because of his wealth. As he said this, Li Yundong leaned over Yu Qing and reached out to gently brush her face, closing her eyes. He let out a long sigh and said, "Alas, such a tragedy happened under my nose. It's really, alas." Ziyuan lowered her eyes, which were full of grief and regret. She sighed softly and said, "The direct bloodline of the Penglai sect, which has been passed down in the cultivation world for nearly 2,000 years, has been severed. The secret method of mend heaven has also been lost. It's sad." The two of them sighed, and Su Chan suddenly whispered, "The secret method of mend heaven has not been lost." Li Yundong and Ziyuan were stunned at the same time. Li Yundong turned his head and said involuntarily, "What did you say?" Su Chan carefully took out a thread-bound book from her arms and held it up with both hands. Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at it and saw that there were 4 small seal characters written on the blue thread-bound book. It was the secret method of mend heaven. It was the third night today, and the second night was at the third night. It could be considered as making up for the lack of updates when I went to Beijing. Chapter 747. Li Yundong looked at the blue thread-bound book that could be found everywhere in street bookstores in surprise. Is this the secret method of patching heaven, which records the secret technique of repairing powerful magical weapons? Didn't you say that you had destroyed this book? At this time, Su Chan's eyes showed the unique slyness of a fox spirit. I was hit on the back by the murderer. At that time, I turned around in pain and happened to fall next to the bookshelf, so I took a book at random while my back was facing him. Anyway, many of the books on this bookshelf are blue thread-bound books, and they are all about the same thickness. My back is facing up, so no one can tell that it is not this one. When the murderer saw that I had destroyed this book, he ran away. At that time, I thought he would kill me, but I didn't expect that he would let me go. Yu Manlu had been hit by the murderer, and his neck had been forcibly broken. Although the back could withstand more blows than the neck, Su Chan was a woman, and there were many vital acupoints on the back far from the chest, and there was also the pivot of the spine. If these areas were injured, the person would be crippled. Therefore, whether it was fighting or fighting, there was a saying that it is better to be punched in the chest than to be slapped in the back. When Li Yundong heard that Su Chan had been slapped, he couldn't stand still. He quickly went forward to check Su Chan's back and asked repeatedly, "You were slapped? Why didn't you tell me just now?" Su Chan wrinkled her nose slightly at Li Yundong, revealing a charming and cute expression. She smiled slightly and said, "Don't worry, the murderer didn't seem to want to hurt me. When he hit me, his strength was reduced by more than half, so I didn't suffer any injuries. I made you worry." Li Yundong was relieved, but he quickly frowned again. "You said that this person's strength was reduced by more than half when he hit you? Why is that?" As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately reacted and answered his own question. "Did he deliberately leave you here so that Wang Jinyuan could frame you?" At this time Ziyuan said, "It's very likely. Looking at the whole thing from the beginning to the end, every thread was connected and everything happened at the right time. Yu Qing went to the backyard and asked us to wait there. When we went to look for her, we happened to be trapped in the illusion formation. We've been trapped in the maze for a while now. If the murderer wanted to kill someone, I'm afraid that even 10 Yu Qings would be dead. However, the murderer waited for Su Chan and Yu Manlu to come back before he made his move. This means that the murderer was clearly waiting for someone to frame him. Moreover, as soon as he succeeded, our illusion maze immediately disappeared, and Wang Jinyuan just happened to appear. If so many coincidences only appear once, it means that it is just a coincidence. But if so many coincidences are gathered together, then it must be a man-made conspiracy." Li Yundong nodded and said in a deep voice, "Yes. I know what you're saying, but what I'm most worried about is not being framed, but, is this murderer here to steal the secret method of heaven patching or to frame us?" Li Yundong's words seemed to be just ordinary reasoning, but when they looked at it, there was a conspiracy that was enough to make their hair stand on end. Ziyuan knew that if it was the former, then why didn't the murderer kill Su Chan? If it was just to steal the secret method of heaven patching, would there be a need to frame her? Only someone who specialized in framing others would deliberately let Su Chan go. If it was the latter, then the question was, how did the murderer know that they were going to Penglai Pavilion? Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other, and both of them showed a touch of shock in each other's eyes. There is a traitor in the Fox Zen school? No way. Li Yundong took a deep breath. A pungent smell of blood drilled into his sinuses and went deep into his lungs, making him feel a burning sensation in his chest and a little hot. At this time, Su Chan also lowered her head, her eyes flickering. No one knew what she was thinking. Li Yundong looked around and said decisively in a deep voice, "Let's go. We've seen the scene, so there's no need to stay any longer. Let's go back first." The three of them nodded, rose up and flew back to Tianan City. After returning home, Su Chan subconsciously wanted to go to her own house, but Li Yundong stopped her. He pointed to Ziyuan's house across the street and said, "Here." Su Chan was also a very smart person. She knew that most of the little foxes were gathered in the living room watching TV at this time, and Li Yundong didn't want to disturb them. She nodded and followed Li Yundong into Ziyuan's house quietly. Although it was across the street, Ziyuan's house was much quieter than Li Yundong's. The little foxes liked to be lively, and Li Yundong's house was bustling all day long, so the little foxes liked to gather there. For a moment, Ziyuan's house seemed extremely empty. After Li Yundong and the others entered Ziyuan's room and closed the door, Li Yundong sighed and put the secret method of heaven patching on the table. He shook his head and said, "If this murderer came for me, then it can be said that I killed leader Yu Qingyu." Ziyuan comforted him softly, "Li Yundong, you're wrong to say that. If that's the case, it's me who killed leader Yu and Yu Manlu. If you hadn't wanted to repair my powerful magical weapon, leader Yu's family wouldn't have suffered such a tragedy." Li Yundong sighed bitterly. "That's not what you said. If you hadn't wanted to go through the divine tribulation for me, your powerful magical weapon wouldn't have been damaged." As they spoke, the two of them fell silent. After a long time, Li Yundong sighed and said, "Maybe this is fate." Ziyuan looked sad and lowered her head in silence. Li Yundong rarely saw her blaming herself like this, so he took the initiative to smile and said, "Everyone has their own fate. You don't have to be sad. Fortunately, the secret method of heaven patching has been preserved completely. The unique skills of the Penglai sect have not been lost. In the future, if we can resolve this misunderstanding with sect Master Yu's husband, we can return this secret manual to them. That way we can return it to them intact." Ziyuan sighed softly. "That's the only way. I hope that leader Yu's partner won't be blinded by hatred." Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "If I find out who the murderer is, I won't let him off." Su Chan, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but think of Yu Yotian's ferocious appearance. For a moment she shivered. She didn't think much of it, but seeing that Li Yundong and Ziyuan were both blaming themselves, she didn't say anything. At this time, after the three of them left, Yu Yutian and Wan Jinyuan returned to the backyard of Penglai Pavilion after a long time. When Yu Yutian returned home, he saw that his wife and son were still lying in a pool of blood. The two of them, who had been alive and smiling yesterday, had now turned into cold corpses. He couldn't help but feel sad and burst into tears. His cry was so desolate that even Wan Jinyuan felt sad when he heard it. He couldn't help but persuade him, "Jinrenyu, don't cry. Death is like an extinguished lamp. If sect leader Yu and Yu Manlu knew about this, they would definitely not want to see you like this." Yu Yutian cried, "Their young spirits have been crushed. How can they still have souls in heaven? Killing people is just a matter of nodding their heads. How much hatred does this person have for our Yu family that he would do such a cruel thing? Why didn't he kill me too?" Wan Jinyuan didn't say anything. He thought to himself, who asked the Yu family to have such a heaven-defying skill as repairing powerful magical weapons, but you don't have a strong self-protection skill? Seeing that Yu Yutian had cried for a long time, Wan Jinyuan tried to persuade him again, "Jinrenyu, let's rest in peace. Don't let leader Yu and Yu Manlu lie like this." Although Yu Yutian had become a monk halfway, after more than 10 years of nurturing, he had developed the habit of thinking of cultivators. The matters of the cultivation world should be handled in the cultivation world. He had made up his mind to take revenge, so he had no intention of calling the police. After crying bitterly for a while, he cremated his wife and son with magic and then put them in a blue and white porcelain jar. Holding the jar, he wiped his tears and said through gritted teeth, "I don't believe that there is no one in the cultivation world who can uphold justice for me." Wan Jinyuan patted his chest and said with a righteous look, "Well, Jinrenyu, I'll accompany you in this lawsuit. I'll definitely testify for you when the time comes." Yu Yotian's eyes were full of gratitude. "Master Wan, I can't thank you enough. When the day comes when my wife and son's death is avenged, I'll definitely repay you well." Wan Jinyuan pretended to smile heroically. "Hey Jinrenyu, what are you talking about? All the cultivators in the world are a family. Besides, it's our duty to help when we see injustice, let alone say a few words of justice." Yu Yutian bowed respectfully to Wan Jinyuan, then went down the mountain with the urn. He had encountered such a big change that he didn't even have time to go to school to ask for leave. He turned around and wanted to find someone to seek justice. But in today's cultivation world, who could seek justice for him? In Yu Youqian's opinion, the Jingyi school, the most powerful sect in the cultivation world, could undoubtedly uphold justice and uphold justice. If they didn't go to Mount Longhu, where else could they go? Therefore Yu Tian and Wang Jinyuan went straight to Mount Longhu. But when he heard that they were going to Mount Longhu, Wang Jinyuan wanted to retreat. The reason was very simple. The current leader of the Jingyi school was Zhang Ling, the Lady of the Earthly Fire. Wang Jinyuan had experienced the power of this woman many times. Although his current cultivation was far higher than hers, Wang Jinyuan was still a little afraid. This kind of thing wasn't something that could be justified just because one's cultivation was higher. As the saying goes, if you are reasonable, you can go anywhere in the world. If you are unreasonable, you can't do anything. This was a universal truth in the cultivation world. When the Japanese came to our country to make trouble, they had also tried hard to find all kinds of excuses. They just wanted to find a good reason for themselves. Although Zhang Ling was overbearing and arrogant, she was not a fool. This woman was very smart. Although sometimes she was a little blinded by the fact that she was biased, most of the time she was definitely not easy to deal with. With Zhang Ling's suspicious nature and sharp tongue, if he had followed Yu Tian up the mountain and been interrogated by her, he was afraid that even if there were no loopholes, he would still be able to find some loopholes. Furthermore, this matter was originally framed. In this case, it was better to let Yu Tian go alone. Although he had mistakenly identified the murderer, his grief and indignation were not fake. Even if Zhang Ling wanted to ask some sharp questions, she was afraid that he, who had lost his wife and son, would not be able to say some sharp words. Moreover, he was the leader of the external alchemy. Even if he met Celestial Master Zhang, he would be on the same level as him. If he went to find Zhang Ling like this, it would be too degrading and embarrassing. After accompanying Yu Tian to the foot of Mount Longhu, Wang Jinyuan said to him, "Jinrenyu, I can only take you up to here. After all, this is Mount Longhu. If I go up, it will be very inconvenient and may cause you some trouble." Yu Tian didn't know what Wang Jinyuan was thinking, but he thought that Wang Jinyuan was worried about the battle between the Naiden sect and the external alchemy and didn't want to cause trouble for himself. He said to Wang Jinyuan gratefully, "Master Wan, I will remember your righteousness. You have already done your best to accompany me here. Master Wan, please rest assured. I will go up the mountain alone." After that, he went up the mountain with the urn in his hands. Although it was early in the morning, there were still many devout pilgrims who came early to offer incense. These pilgrims saw Yu Tian holding an urn and kneeling in front of the gate of Mount Longhu, crying loudly, "This is injustice." These pilgrims were shocked. Oh my God, where did this lunatic come from? Why did he come to Mount Longhu to complain? Did he take the wrong medicine? Chapter 748. Yu Youqian's cries not only shocked the pilgrims on Mount Longhu, but also the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu. They looked at Yu Tian in shock, thinking that he was a lunatic. A young Taoist priest frowned and said, "Hey, are you crazy? Go to the Public Security Bureau to complain about your grievances. Why are you here?" When Yu Tian was found by Wang Jinyuan, he was still working overtime at school, so he was naturally wearing ordinary clothes. After a busy night, he was not in the mood to change into a Taoist robe, so when he came, he was still dressed like an ordinary person. Naturally, the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu would not think of him as a cultivator. When Yu Tian heard the Taoist priest's words, he was immediately furious. He turned his head and shouted angrily, "I'm Yu Tian from the Penglai sect. Where is Master Zhang? Where is Zhang Ling?" When the Taoist priest heard this, his heart skipped a beat. He immediately turned around and ran away. He knew that the person in front of him was a peer in the cultivation world and was not someone he could easily offend. Therefore he quickly reported the news to Zhang Ling, leaving Yu Tian to be pointed at and whispered by the tourists and pilgrims. When Zhang Ling heard the news, she couldn't help but be stunned. She turned to look at her disciple, Zhou Ping. "Why is Yu Tian here? Isn't he the Taoist companion of the leader of the Penglai sect? Why did he come to our Mount Longhu to complain?" Zhou Ping also said curiously, "I've never heard of such a cultivator before." Zhang Ling shook her head and said, "The Penglai sect is small, and leader Yu and her Taoist companion are very low-key. It's normal that you haven't heard of them. Hurry up and find Zhang Kongyun for me. I have a bad feeling that something must have happened." Zhou Ping responded, turned around and went out the door. Not long after, Zhang Kongyun arrived, accompanied by Zhang Lufang, who looked curious. After bowing to Zhang Ling with a smile, Zhang Lufang was ready to watch the show excitedly. When Zhang Ling saw that Zhang Kongyun had arrived, she motioned for Zhou Ping to bring Yu Tian here. Zhou Ping nodded and turned to go out. About 10 minutes later, Yu Tian entered the lobby with the urn. When Yu Tian saw Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun, he immediately fell to his knees and shouted, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire, the Lady of Kongyun, you must uphold justice for me." The scene in front of them was really like a historical film where a wronged person stopped the sedan chair of an official and shouted, "Just and honorable lord, you have to seek justice for this commoner." The people in the room didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even Zhang Ling, who had experienced many storms, couldn't help but feel a little amused at this time. She quickly said, "Jinrenyu, get up quickly. What's the matter? Get up and talk." Yu Tian knelt on the ground and shook his head. "No, Lady of the Earthly Fire, promise me first that you will seek justice for me. Only then will I get up." Zhang Ling smiled bitterly and said, "Jinrenyu, how can I promise you if you don't tell me what it is?" Yu Tian told them everything that had happened last night bit by bit. When he got to the sad part, tears and snot flowed down his face and he beat his chest and wailed. It was truly a heart-wrenching story. Even Zhang Lufang, who had wanted to watch the show, couldn't help but cry at the side. After Yu Tian finished telling the whole story, he cried bitterly and said, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire, Jinren Kongyun. How could there be such a cruel witch in this world? Our Penglai sect has always been kind to others. We don't participate in the competition for fame and fortune, nor do we cause trouble. How could such a disaster have befallen us? If I hadn't run away quickly that night, I'm afraid that I would have been killed by that witch." Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun were stunned. Zhang Ling was stunned for a long time before she stammered, You mean Su Chan of the Fox Zen School killed the leader of your Penglai sect in Yumanlu? No, it can't be, right? Leader Yu's cultivation is not low. He shouldn't have lost to Su Chan. Even if he couldn't win, he should have been able to escape." Yu Tian raised the urn in his hand and cried, "The ashes of my beloved wife and son are here. Their bodies and souls have been destroyed." Everyone in the room gasped. Zhang Kongyun tugged at his white beard and asked, "You just said that Wang Jinyuan, the leader of the Gizao sect, was also present at that time?" Yu Tian nodded and said, "If it weren't for Master Wan, I'm afraid that this witch would have killed me on the spot." Zhang Kongyun became more and more confused. Master Wan's cultivation is very high. It's impossible for him to lose to Su Chan of the Fox Zen School. Yu Tian smiled bitterly and said, "But it's impossible for you to not know who the person behind this witch is." The expressions of the people in the room immediately turned cold, and they all became solemn. A year ago, Li Yundong was a name that few people remembered except for his parents. But now, in the cultivation world of China and Japan, this name was really well known and everyone knew it. There was really a saying that if one didn't know Li Yundong, it would be useless to call himself a golden immortal. As soon as Yu Tian mentioned that Li Yundong was involved in this tragedy, Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun suddenly felt their hearts tighten and they looked at each other. Since the inauguration ceremony, Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun had talked about Li Yundong in private. Both of them had unanimously concluded that Li Yundong was the strongest and most promising young cultivator in more than 500 years from the late Ming dynasty to the modern era. His spiritual energy was terrifying, and his strength was unfathomable. His rise was unstoppable. Regardless of whether they liked or disliked Li Yundong, at least the Jingyi school could not afford to offend such a powerful character. What's more, the Jingyi school was in trouble both internally and externally. Not only had the inauguration ceremony been ruined by the Japanese, but the power of the Jingyi school had also plummeted. What was even more frightening was that the Xiantian sect had also taken advantage of the situation to force him to abdicate. The Jingyi school could barely take care of itself now. How could they have the leisure to uphold justice? What's more, Li Wudi was involved. Regardless of whether this matter was related to Li Wudi or not, even if it was related to him, would the Jingyi school start a war with Li Wudi for the Penglai sect, which they usually had no contact with? No way. Even a fool would know how to answer this multiple-choice question. Zhang Ling's mind was as fast as lightning. She asked, "Jinrenyu, how do you know that Li Wudi is the mastermind?" Yu Tian wiped away his tears. "He was there that night. If he wasn't the mastermind, why did he go there?" Zhang Kongyun frowned and said, "But even if he was there, you can't be so sure that he is the mastermind. What kind of deep hatred does he have for your Penglai sect that he would do such a cruel thing?" Yu Tian gritted his teeth and said, "To tell you the truth, the unique skill of our Penglai sect, the secret method of patching heaven, has not been lost. I think Li Yundong came to snatch it. Moreover, I also found that the secret method of patching heaven had been stolen that night. They were the only ones who appeared that night. Who else could it be?" This sentence was too powerful. Both Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun knew that even if this matter had nothing to do with Li Yundong and Su Chan were still the biggest suspects. At this time, Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun were cautious and didn't say anything. However, Zhang Lufang suddenly asked, "Jinrenyu, how many people know that the secret method of patching heaven still exists in the world?" Yu Tian was stunned for a moment. He knew that this news had been told to him by his wife. He didn't know who his wife had told. Yu Tian thought for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, "No one knows." Zhang Lufang asked curiously, "Then how did Li Yundong and Su Chan know?" "It's so strange." Yu Tian suddenly raised his head and said angrily, "Do you mean that I'm lying?" Zhang Lufang saw his ferocious look and was so scared that she took a step back. She immediately waved her hand and said, No, that's not what I meant. What I mean is, how did Li Yundong know that the secret method of patching heaven is still with you? Don't you think it's strange? Moreover, Li Yundong can do these things himself. Why did he ask Su Chan to do it? Wouldn't it be much more efficient for him to do it himself? Yu Tian and Wang Jinyuan had already discussed this before they came. Yu Tian laughed angrily and said, "If he had recovered from his injuries at this time, do you think he wouldn't have wanted to do it himself?" "Jinren Zhang, what do you mean by saying good things about him? Do you think I would slander a good person?" Zhang Liufang's expression changed and she said seriously, "Jinren Yu, I don't mean to doubt you, but as far as I know, Jinren Li is not such a vicious and evil person. Moreover, he was very strict with his disciples at the Taoist assembly. I don't think Su Chan is such a villain. Why don't you calm down and find out the truth first?" Yu Tian's face turned pale. He turned to look at Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun and said, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire, Jinren Kongyun, do you think so too?" Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun looked at each other. Zhang Kongyun lowered his head and remained silent. Zhang Ling sighed softly and comforted him, "Jinren Yu, this matter is not a trivial matter. I think it's better to be cautious. Why don't you cultivate in Mount Longhu for a period of time? When we find out the truth of the matter, we can make a decision. What do you think?" Yu Tian suddenly remembered what Wang Jinyuan had told him before. "Jinren Yu, it's not that I want to pour cold water on you, but even if you go to the Jingyi school, they may not be willing to help you. Now that the Penglai sect has been destroyed, and the secret method of patching heaven has been taken away by others, what benefits can they get from avenging you? Offending Li Wudi for the sake of a sect that was already in ruins? Do you think they would be so stupid? You have to be careful of being betrayed by others with honeyed words and hidden daggers." Thinking of this, Yu Tian immediately became extremely vigilant. He held the urn tightly in his arms, stood up quickly and kept retreating. "What do you want to do? Detain me here, inform Li Yundong of the news and then kill me to keep me quiet?" Everyone in the room was speechless. They hadn't expected that Yu Tian would be so paranoid as to think of them as accomplices, but they couldn't understand why an ordinary person like Yu Tian would suddenly have a beautiful and happy family destroyed in an instant. His mind had become extremely paranoid, almost to the point of being demonic. He had already determined that Li Yundong and Su Chan were the murderers. Anyone who doubted this was an accomplice. When Yu Tian saw that everyone in the room was smiling bitterly, he became more and more certain of his judgment. Suddenly he ran out quickly. As he ran he shouted, "Murder! The Jingyi school is going to kill me to keep me quiet." Zhou Ping was furious when she heard this. She subconsciously wanted to chase after him. ***, how dare you slander me? However, Zhang Ling grabbed her, shook her head and sighed. This Jinren Yu is not far from madness. He is already miserable enough. Forget it, let him go. Zhou Ping frowned and said, "Master, do you believe his words?" Zhang Ling pondered for a while, then asked instead of answering, "Pinger, do you believe his words?" Zhou Ping was stunned for a moment. The figure who had once blocked the 6 great sects in Mount Tianlong, snatched food from the tiger's mouth in Mount Gizhou, laughed and cursed at the Taoist assembly, and fought against the Japanese cultivation world alone at the inauguration ceremony had suddenly jumped out. No matter how much she disliked Li Yundong, she couldn't deny the fact that Li Yundong was an indomitable man. How could such a man do such a cruel thing? After thinking for a while, Zhou Ping said flatly, "I believe that the tragedy that happened to him is true, But if Su Chan is the murderer and Li Yundong is the mastermind, this is too unbelievable. I don't believe it. Zhang Lufeng, who was standing to one side, suddenly asked curiously, Eldest Shiji, haven't you always hated the Fox Zen school and Li Yundong? Zhou Ping said seriously, yes, I do hate them. But even though I hate them, I really can't imagine that Li Yundong is such a person. As for Su Chan, I don't think she has the ability or the guts to do such a thing. The Fox Zen school has always been the target of public criticism. Why would she do such a heinous thing at this critical juncture and cause trouble for herself? The whole thing seems reasonable and well-founded, but if you look at it carefully, there are many flaws. At this time, Zhang Ling suddenly pondered for a while and said, do you think that Li Yundong and the others went to snatch the secret method of heaven patching for Ziyuan to repair the powerful magical weapon? Zhang Kongyun and Zhang Lufeng were stunned and blurted out, it's very possible. However, Zhou Ping shook her head and said, that's even more problematic. Given Ziyuan's character, she would definitely have gone with Li Yundong. If she had been there at that time and Li Yundong had done such a thing, do you think Yu Tian would have had a chance to come to our Mount Longhu? For a moment, Zhang Ling and the others were all silent. They knew Ziyuan's ability very well. Even if Wang Jinyuan was there, he might not be Ziyuan's match. They could kill Yu Tian on the spot and the whole thing would be buried in the sea. There would be no truth. Zhang Kongyun let out a long sigh and said, the affairs of the world are really confusing. I don't know which person behind the scenes did such a heinous thing. I always feel that this is just the beginning. Zhang Ling thought for a moment and said, what you said makes sense. However, no matter what, this matter is very strange. We can't be easily involved in it. Otherwise, the cultivation world will be in chaos. The Japanese have just left, and the Xintian sect wants to take advantage of the situation. We should consider shrinking our defenses first. Just as the Jingyi school decided to stay out of trouble and Yu Tian left in disappointment, Li Yundong and the others received a reasonable and unexpected piece of good news at home. Chapter 749. At noon the next day after the murder of the Penglai sect, Li Yundong cautiously chose not to go out. When he returned to his room, he found that most of his physical injuries had recovered, thanks to the strong 5 internal organs that had been transformed by the Renyuan Jindan and the Diyuan Jindan. In the battle with Sayonji Tsunekatsu, the most important thing for Li Yundong was that his meridians and qi and blood were seriously damaged, but his 5 internal organs were not injured. This was equivalent to a fierce battle on the border between the two countries. His foundation was not hurt, so his recovery was particularly fast. Thinking of what had happened last night, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel a little scared. If the other party had come for him, if the other party wanted to kill him, then last night would have been the best opportunity. His cultivation had been greatly reduced, but he had been running around with the body of Yang spirit. It was really audacious. Thinking about this, Li Yundong didn't dare to run around for a while. He made up his mind to stay by his body and wait for his injury to heal. Once his injury was healed, his body would return to being a leakless body. At that time he would have the power of Jinshin again. With the power of Jinshin in hand, who would be afraid of in the world? But at this time Feng Na called Li Yundong's cell phone. What? The Japanese are here again? Li Yundong said in surprise after hearing the news from Feng Na. Feng Na said with joy and worry, yes, this time there are more people than last time. Li Yundong temporarily put aside the heavy heart brought about by the Penglai sect case and smiled slightly. Isn't that good? The business in the shop is getting better and better. I should congratulate you. Feng Na said worriedly, what's good about it? Last time all the tea in the shop was drunk. I only had time to buy a little. Now it's only enough for these people to drink a cup of tea. Li Yundong said with a smile, you can go to other tea shops and buy some ready-made tea. Anyway, you won't lose money. Feng Na sighed. I went there yesterday and bought all the tea I could buy nearby, but they still drank it all. These Japanese really don't seem to be drinking tea, it seems like they are drinking wine. Aren't the Japanese very particular about tea art? Why do they all drink tea so fiercely? Li Yundong smiled and said, do you think everyone in Japan is like this? This was Yamaguchi Gumi, a mafia. Do you expect these people who fight and kill all day to quietly appreciate the tea ceremony? You think too highly of them. By the way, these guys didn't cause any trouble, right? Only then did Feng Na smile. No, they're just a little unhappy that they can't see you. But they're still very devout in the shop. I heard that the underworld people in our country worship Guan Yu. Why do you think the Japanese underworld people worship the immovable wisdom king? In the future, our store will become the immovable wisdom king shrine worshipped by the Japanese? Can I consider selling some incense and candles to make some money? Li Yundong smiled and said, that's a good idea. Just set a higher price. Those who want to burn incense will definitely come. It would be a waste not to take advantage of these Japanese. However, Feng Na hesitated and said, but will they not come again? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Do you still want to make money off me for the rest of my life? Do you think he will always come here? Was he really a moron? I just need to make a few bucks. Hearing Li Yundong's words, Feng Na immediately thought it through and said happily, well, I know what to do. Li Yundong knew that after Feng Na hung up the phone with a smile, the Japanese people would cry. It would be strange if they didn't cry for their parents. These Japanese people won't come again after being slaughtered a few times, will they? It's not a good thing that Desangxian always comes to Yamaguchi-gumi. Li Yundong thought to himself. He couldn't help but think of the scene in which the Desangxian was full of black-clothed people. A good person came downstairs and wanted to have a serious drink of tea, but all the black-clothed people looked at the door with murderous eyes, which immediately scared the common people and made them flee. If it really becomes like this, then Desangxian should change its name to Desangxian. The shop is black-clothed and the price is black-clothed. It didn't fail to live up to the name of Black Shop, Li Yundong thought self-deprecatingly. However, he did not expect that the Japanese would be extorted even more ruthlessly by Feng Na this time. Many members of Yamaguchi-gumi did not even get to drink tea. Instead, they drank plain water and happily handed over a lot of money. Feng Na's hands were weak and her heart was guilty. She even suspected that after these Japanese people paid the money with a smile, they would turn around and kill her, the black-hearted businessman, with a knife. However, after waiting for a few days in fear, what she was worried about did not happen. On the contrary, Japanese people poured into the Desangxian shop in an endless stream. Almost every day there were Japanese people coming, and there were at least 10 people a day. And as time went by, the number of Japanese tourists gradually increased, and they were no longer all Yamaguchi-gumi people. What surprised and puzzled Feng Na was that these mountain pass people and ordinary tourists did not have anything to do with each other. Basically, they drank their own tea and burned their own incense. They were clearly separated from each other and minded their own business. They did not look at each other too much. Although the business of the Desangxian shop had improved by leaps and bounds, Feng Na still felt that the situation in front of her was a little funny. Almost all the people who came to the tea shop in China were Japanese, and there were only a few Chinese people. It was really strange. But what Feng Na did not know was that in Japan, the tea ceremony was an elegant and noble thing. On the one hand, these Yamaguchi-gumi people could attach themselves to the elegance, and on the other hand they could take the opportunity to worship the Buddhist mafia boss Akalanatha. One had to know that there were times when King Kong was angry, and there were times when the Buddha roared like a lion. However, when the Buddha was angry he couldn't possibly go into the arena to PK with his bare arms. That would be too embarrassing. Even if he encountered the great sage equaling heaven who refused to submit to heaven and earth, the Buddha would only exchange a few blows with him in a friendly manner. However, Buddha would always encounter powerful demons. At this time he needed someone to help him deal with these enemies. At this time the 5 wisdom kings came into being, and the Akalanatha was the incarnation of Buddha's anger. He had the functions of killing people and robbing people, silencing people and arson people. There was no one in the world that he could not defeat. Wasn't such a character the object of every gangster's fantasy? Moreover, Japan was the only country in the world that recognized the legalization of mafia. The reason for this recognition was very simple because the power of mafia had penetrated into every level of Japan. The whole politics of Japan was a living combination of mafia politics and black money politics. If they wanted to eradicate the power of mafia, the whole politics of Japan would immediately collapse. Therefore, in order to protect themselves and whitewash themselves, the Japanese politicians made the law to legalize the power of mafia. When all the people did not see the mafia as a mafia, the politics secretly controlled by the mafia was naturally not a mafia politics. It was also because of this reason that the Japanese Yakuza parade, which was supported by the law, was a unique scene on the streets of Japan. It was rare for a Chinese like Feng Na to see so many Yakuza members swaggering through the streets, but the Japanese were used to it. Moreover, these ordinary Japanese tourists also knew that as long as they didn't look at these Yakuza members, they wouldn't get into trouble. These ordinary Japanese tourists were also devout believers of Buddhism. After hearing the news from the Japanese cultivation world, many people came to China to worship the living immovable wisdom king out of curiosity. Although they did not see Li Yundong in person, they saw many mafia members of Yamaguchi-gumi also here to worship and drink tea, which strengthened their views. Therefore they went back and spread the news. The tea shop opened by the reincarnated Wisdom King was a mess in China, but it quickly became famous in Japan. This could be considered as planting flowers in the wall, the fragrance outside the wall. The east side was not bright, but the west side was bright. Just as the business of Desangxian tea shop was booming, Yu Tian, who had been asking for justice everywhere, was once again rejected by the Chuanjian dragon sect. Yu Tian originally thought that the Chuanjian dragon sect had always boasted of being a righteous sect and would help him uphold justice. However, he rarely asked about the affairs of the cultivation world. He did not know that the sect that had the best personal relationship with Li Yundong in the cultivation world was the Chuanjian dragon sect. After seeing Yu Tian off, Du Fei, who was thinking in the spacious and bright office, suddenly raised his head and looked at Yu Sheng and Wei Qing beside him with a puzzled expression. "Do you believe Yu Tian's words?" Wei Qing and Yu Sheng looked at each other. Wei Qing said first, "I believe half of it, but I don't believe half of it." Du Fei asked, "What do you mean?" Wei Qing said very seriously, "I believe that what happened to Jinren Yu is true, but I don't believe that Li Yundong would instruct Su Chan to do such a thing." At this time Yu Sheng also nodded and said firmly, "Jinren Li is definitely not such a person. I've fought with him before. Jinren Li has always been above board in fights and has never won by tricks or conspiracies. Moreover, his Jinchi is majestic and righteous. He is definitely not such a despicable person. If he were such a despicable person, it would be impossible for him to have such Hauren Jinchi. As the saying goes, one's appearance comes from one's heart. In the cultivation world, there was also a saying that people's hearts were revealed in fights. Although this saying was not necessarily absolutely correct, it was quite reasonable. Although Du Fei didn't agree with Yu Sheng's reasoning, he agreed with Yu Sheng's final opinion. Du Fei nodded and said, "I also don't think Jinren Li is such a person, but this matter happened so suddenly. Jinren Yu doesn't seem to be a person who will give up easily. If he makes such a big fuss about it, I'm afraid it will be very disadvantageous to Jinren Li in the future." As he spoke, Du Fei suddenly stood up and said decisively, "No, I have to see Li Yundong immediately and tell him about this." Yu Sheng didn't have much of a reaction when he heard this, but Wei Qing, who was next to him, became excited. Her eyes were shining. Okay, I want to go too. I've been busy all day today and my head is swollen. It's raining all the time and the air is so humid that I want to die. I feel uncomfortable all over. Asterisk. Chapter 750. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu Sanlian Literature website. When Du Fei arrived at Li Yundong's house with Wei Qing, almost all the little foxes in Li Yundong's house had gone to help in the Desangxian store. Even Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong had gone with them. Only Su Chan and Li Yundong were left in the big house. Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and the others were cultivating quietly in the house opposite. Li Yundong was very surprised to see Du Fei's visit, but he soon smiled and said, "Jinren Du, how have you been? Are you here to urge me to return the burning thumb pot?" After Li Yundong borrowed the burning thumb pot from Du Fei, he had kept it with him. It was a bit like Liu Bei borrowed Jingzhou and never returned it. However, he really couldn't leave this powerful magical weapon and was reluctant to return it to Du Fei. At this time, seeing Du Fei come to his door, he felt sorry for him, so he simply said it first to avoid the awkward atmosphere when Du Fei asked for it. Du Fei laughed, saluted with one hand and said, "Jinren Li, you must be joking. This Buddhist powerful magical weapon is like a pearl covered with dust in my hands, but it shines in your hands." The battle between Mount Longhu and Takahashi Shoto was really satisfying. If such a powerful magical weapon was in my hands, I'm afraid we could only watch Takahashi Shoto escape back to Japan. At this time Wei Qing was the first to respond. She said with a smile, "That's right. If a murderous devil like Takahashi Shoto could become a Buddha immediately, it would be too annoying. Fortunately you are powerful. Otherwise, it would be a great shame for our Chinese cultivation world." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Don't mention it. Jinren Du is broad-minded and let me use this powerful magical weapon to do whatever I want." While they were talking, Li Yundong had already welcomed them into the living room and turned to ask Su Chan to make tea for them. Du Fei glanced at Su Chan with flickering eyes, then sat down on the sofa and suddenly asked, "Jinren Li, do you know why I suddenly came to visit?" Li Yundong smiled and said, If it wasn't for the burning thumb pot, I really wouldn't know. Du Fei said with a serious face, Jinren Li, do you know Yu Yutian? Li Yundong's expression suddenly changed, and the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He said in a low voice, I know. How do you know him? Du Fei stared at Li Yunyang and slowly told him about how Yu Yutian had found him. He said, according to my speculation, Yu Yutian must have found the Jingyi school first, and then came to our Chuanjin sect. However, leader has been in closed-door training recently. He couldn't find anyone, so he came to me. There was a faint smile at the corner of Li Yundong's mouth. Jinren Du, do you believe that I did this? As he spoke, he glanced at Su Chan, who was biting her lip. Or do you believe that she did it? Du Fei smiled slightly. Jinren Li, if I believed that you did it, I wouldn't have come here today. Li Yundong asked, then why did Jinren Du come? Du Fei smiled and said, I want to hear you tell me in person that you are not a murderer, Jinren Li. Li Yundong immediately asked, that's it? Do you believe me just because I say it? Du Fei smiled and said, Jinren Li is a modest gentleman. Of course I believe what you say. Li Yundong stared at Du Fei for a long time, then slowly revealed a sincere smile. Jinren Du, I didn't do this, nor did Su Chan. We were framed. As he spoke, Li Yundong told the whole story from beginning to end and sighed. But the whole thing has a lot to do with me. I will definitely find the murderer behind the scenes. First, I will give leader you an explanation. Second, I will prove Su Chan and me innocent. At this time, Wei Qing, who had not had a chance to interrupt, suddenly said very seriously, Jinren Li, I believe in you. You will definitely find the real murderer. Li Yundong laughed. Jinren Wei, you really have confidence in me? I don't even have confidence in myself. The people in the room all laughed. Su Chan's heart was heavy, and her smile was a little forced. At this time, Du Fei said with a smile, Jinren Li, you have to be careful these days. I think Jinren Yu has reached a dead end. He insists that you are the murderer and is now running around. Although I believe that no one from the sects will stand up for him, Jinren Li, you have to be careful. If anything is repeated too many times, the lie will become the truth. If someone uses this matter to make things difficult for you, the consequences will be unimaginable. You have to be on guard. Li Yundong nodded and said, Jinren Du, you are right. I am prepared. Please rest assured. Du Fei laughed and said, Jinren Li, I am relieved to hear that. You are now the pillar of the Chinese cultivation world, the stabilizing force. Don't let the Japanese not defeat you, but you fall because of the conspiracy of your own people. Li Yundong smiled and said, the reason why a conspiracy is called a conspiracy is that it can't see the light of day. It's like snow in winter that melts when it sees the sun. I believe that in this world, conspiracies can't compete with justice. I believe that justice exists in people's hearts just like you, Jinren Du and Jinren Wei chose to believe me. Du Fei was relieved. After chatting with Li Yundong and the others for a while, he chose to leave. In the next few days, Li Yundong guarded his body tightly, and his yang spirit did not wander around. He did not go out of the door, nor did he take a step. 6 days later, early in the morning, the little foxes who had prepared to go to the Desanxian tea shop to help, were busy grooming themselves. These days, the business of the Desanxian was booming. People from the Yamaguchi-gumi came one after another. These Yamaguchi-gumi aroused the interest of ordinary Japanese tourists, and these ordinary Japanese tourists aroused the interest of Chinese tourists. Chinese people liked to join in the fun, follow the trend, and be cultured. When many people saw these Japanese people rushing toward the Desanxian tea shop, even the most indifferent people couldn't help but have a big question mark in their hearts. What on earth are these Japanese people going to do? As the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Slowly, some Chinese people who dared to try went upstairs to drink tea. It was hard to say whether they could taste the tea or not, but every waiter in the Desanxian tea shop was a beautiful little fox. Even the lobby manager and the assistant were pretty girls. Even if they didn't drink tea, it was still a pleasant thing to look at beautiful women here. Moreover, the appearance of so many Yamaguchi-gumi in these places was something that could only be seen in movies. Therefore, many tea guests also went to watch the fun. They pointed at the Yamaguchi-gumi in the tea house and talked about it. It seemed that it was very cool to criticize these world-famous Yamaguchi-gumi members like this. And the truth was that if ordinary people in Japan dared to point at the Yamaguchi-gumi like this, they would be miserable. The Yamaguchi-gumi would definitely rush up and beat them up as soon as possible. Not to mention pointing at them, even looking at them would cause a bloody disaster. But these Yamaguchi people also knew that this was China's territory, It was the Akalanthus tea house. Even if there were people pointing at them, they turned a blind eye, as if they did not hear anything. They behaved as if they were good students. The Chinese tea guests wished they could give each of them a certificate of merit. In the past, the business of Desanxian had been too quiet, and the beauties in the shop were too beautiful. Therefore, the impression it gave people was that the shop must be very shady and the price must be very high, so no one dared to go there. However, when the Desanxian really became a veritable black shop, and its business was as busy as a market, no one thought so. On the contrary, people rushed to join in the fun and rushed to the Desanxian to taste tea, look at the beauties and look at the Japanese Yamaguchi. Although the price was ridiculously high, the mentality of the tea guests changed from no one dared to go there to this shop's business is so good, and so many Japanese have come from afar. There must be a reason for the high price. Moreover, the decoration of this shop, as well as the appearance and quality of the waiters, even a 7-star hotel does not have such stunning waiters. It's normal that it's expensive. Only when it's expensive can it show its style, and only when it's expensive can it show its grade. If the price is low, I won't go there. It had to be said that the polarized business situation of Desanxian had surprised Feng Na and Cheng Cheng. At night, they counted the money until their hands were cramping and they had to sigh. These people are so despicable. They don't come when the price is low, but when the price is high, they praise it. The consumer psychology of the Chinese people is really difficult to understand. But no matter what, Desanxian had become popular, at least in Japan and Tianan City. In Japan, there was even a special website for Desanxian, introducing every detail of the tea shop opened by the reincarnated immovable Wisdom King. There was a detailed introduction of every pillar and every teacup. At first, most of the people who logged on were the low-level Yamaguchi-gumi who had nothing to do. This group of low-level gangsters had nothing to do all day when they were not fighting or collecting protection fees. They were so idle that they would pick out lice in their crotches and pluck hair from their crotches. When they heard that there was such a website, they immediately swarmed over. But this group of people also had their own families, and their families also had their own friends. Japan was a religious country with nearly 100 million Buddhists, and immovable Wisdom King was the god that all Buddhists believed in. With such a deep mass base, the popularity and traffic of this website rose steadily, and it quickly became popular like a rocket. Especially when the Yamaguchi-gumi revealed that Li Yundong had defeated the 3 giants of Japanese Buddhism by himself. These tourists who logged on to the website of Desanxian were all speechless for a while, and then they frantically inquired about the authenticity of this matter in shock. The official websites of Pure Land True Sect, Xinyan Tantrism, and Tiantai Sect were flooded with all kinds of saliva and questions. The enmity between Pure Land True Sect and Tiantai Sect with Li Yundong was too great, so the 2 giants unanimously remained silent. Kaisai Hikaryuni of Xinyan Tantrism seemed to be much smarter. Not only did he talk about the fight, but he also praised Li Yundong and praised him highly. Because he knew that only by creating an opponent that made the Japanese believers feel invincible and invincible could they be forgiven for their defeat. At this time, Ise Xingguang of Ise Shinto also stood up to speak, praising Li Yundong as the unique great cultivator in the Chinese cultivation world in recent years. His cultivation was profound, his magical power was amazing, and he was invincible in fighting. Even in the Chinese cultivation world, he had a nickname. Invincible Li. Japanese people had a strong slave mentality. When you were weaker than him, he would definitely bully you. When you were about the same as him, he would definitely compete with you. But when you were stronger than him, he would shout sourly. But when you were much stronger than him, he would worship you respectfully. Ise Shinto had a deep influence in Japan, and at this time the Abe family also stood up to prove this point. At this time all the doubts disappeared, replaced by one-sided praise and flattery. Especially when the busybody found out the details of Li Yundong, all the curious believers were stunned for a moment. What? Such a great cultivator with profound cultivation, amazing magical power, and invincible in fighting was not an old man in his 70s or 80s, but a great cultivator who was only 20 years old. And he was so handsome? Was there any justice in this world? Was there any humanity left? The female believers went crazy after seeing the photos of Li Yundong that had been circulated. Overnight, Li Yundong had gained many fanatical fans in distant Japan. If it weren't for the distance, there would have been many fanatical admirers at the door of his house. It had to be said that no one had expected that the Battle of Mount Longhu would lead to such a result. This really surprised everyone, especially Kaisai Hikaryuni, Ise Xingguang, and Abe Yuri who had participated in the campaign. They hadn't expected that the enthusiasm of the people would be so exaggerated. Si Chuyun commented on these crazy believers sarcastically, "If Li Yundong opens a Desangxian tea shop in Kyoto, I'm afraid that the shop will be torn down by these believers the next day. They will take every piece of wood and brick of the shop and take it back to keep it as a family heirloom." Under such circumstances, the future of Desangxian was obvious. The little foxes were so busy every day that their backs ached. They had been too idle before, but now they were so busy that they didn't even have time to watch soap operas. But no matter what, good business always made people happy. But what made the little foxes a little unhappy was that their leader had gone into seclusion again. When the Desangxian tea shop needed him the most, he chose to go into seclusion again. But today, when the little foxes finished washing up and were about to go to Desangxian to report, Ling Yu saw a person coming out of Li Yundong's room. Ling Yu's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, "Leader, you've come out of seclusion?" As she spoke, she suddenly stopped in place and looked at Li Yundong with her mouth agape. For a moment she couldn't say anything. At this time, the little foxes also looked at Li Yundong in unison. They saw that the leader, whom they were so familiar with, seemed to have been reborn again, and his appearance and figure had changed a lot. Oh, this is the second update to make up for yesterday's update. I'm sorry, I was too tired and my head was throbbing. I could only wait until I woke up this morning to make up for it in the future. If you guys still haven't updated after 12 o'clock, then don't wait anymore, and there is a limit to one's strength. To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 751. When a cultivator's yang spirit was cultivated to its peak state, the Jinshin was the most precious. Even after transcending the thunder tribulation and becoming a golden immortal, their yang spirit body would still become a Jinshin. Could be said that the highest level of the yang spirit was the Jinshin. The reason why it was called the Jinshin was that the Taoist cultivators borrowed the name from the Buddhist classics. It meant that gold was precious and rare, and gold could be forged at will and changed into any shape. The yang spirit of a cultivator could be ever-changing, but it was absolutely impossible for the body to change at will. Even if a cultivator practiced hard and used the powerful power of his internal organs to instantly transform the body in a short period of time, it was only a change on the original foundation of the body. It could not be as ever-changing as the yang spirit. The physical body was the furnace to bear the spiritual power of the cultivators. Without a good furnace, no matter how high one's cultivation level or how deep one's spiritual power was, it would be useless. Therefore, the Taoist cultivators attached great importance to the cultivation of the physical body. Their highest requirement for the physical body was not measured by gold, but by jade. Jade was the beauty of a stone. It had 5 virtues. It was moist and gentle. It could be said to be a flawless stone. It was rare and precious, gentle and euphemistic. Jade was often used together with gold. This could be seen from the long-standing idioms or proverbs, such as golden rules and jade rules, golden advice, and one has eyes but fails to recognize the golden inlaid jade. Therefore, cultivators used jade to measure their own furnace bodies, which also meant that they regarded the two as equally important, of the same status, and kept abreast of each other. When a Taoist cultivator achieved the Great Way, his physical body was often measured by the realm of jade. At this time, Li Yundong's change had begun to transform into the realm of jade. In the past, Li Yundong's skin was as delicate and white as a woman's, but at this time, when the little foxes looked at him, they saw that Li Yundong's skin was so delicate that almost no pores could be seen. His whole body seemed to be carved out of jade, and there was a faint layer of gentle light on his skin. Ling Yu was shocked and thought that Li Yundong was still walking outside with his yang spirit. With the ability of the yang spirit to change constantly, it was naturally not surprising that he could change like this. But when Ling Yu got close to Li Yundong, she widened her eyes and looked at him carefully for a while. Then she rushed to the room behind Li Yundong and took a look. Only then did she find that Li Yundong had recovered from his injuries and was walking in his body. Ling Yu held her face with both hands and exclaimed, "Sect Master, your cauldron body has been cultivated to the jade body realm?" This shout startled the little foxes and they gathered together. They looked at Li Yundong with envy in their eyes. The bolder ones went forward to touch him, poke him, and then ran away with a smile. In the past, in their eyes, although Li Yundong's personality was easygoing, he always exuded an aggressive heroic spirit. Even after he had cultivated to the Jinshin phase, his cultivation had begun to move towards the realm of returning to nature, and his heroic spirit had begun to slowly restrain. There was always a heroic spirit unique to young people between his eyebrows. But now, all the edges between Li Yundong's eyebrows had disappeared. His sword-like eyebrows had become straight, and the sharp edges at the tip of his eyebrows had become gentle and obtuse, as if someone had specially trimmed them. His facial features also seemed to be covered with a layer of faint crystal luster, which made people feel comfortable at first glance. There was no aggressive aura at all. Especially when Li Yundong looked at them at this time, his eyes were deep and gentle. They were both deep and broad, but also crystal clear and gentle. At this moment, a phrase came to all of their minds at the same time. A gentleman is like a jade. Li Yundong laughed and patted their heads. He hadn't expected that after this serious injury, the heavenly Jindan technique in his body would once again play a role in changing blood, bones and internal organs, shaping his body cauldron to a whole new realm. In the eyes of ordinary people, Li Yundong had only become more handsome, and his temperament had become more elegant and mature. But in the eyes of a discerning cultivator, Li Yundong's fighting strength had once again reached a higher level because of the growth of his cauldron body. The reason why cultivators had magical power was that they could activate the essence, qi and blood in their bodies. By doing so they could produce a powerful energy. However, people were born with loopholes. The 7 orifices, pores and other places were all big loopholes in the human body. When cultivators activated their essence, qi and blood, the yuanqi of the human body would involuntarily leak out through these loopholes. This principle was like a pressure cooker. If there were more air holes, the air pressure inside would naturally be lower, and it would be more impossible for the things inside to be cooked or compressed into smaller things. The reason why cultivators could compress all the jinqi in their bodies into Niden was that they had a leakless body without any flaws. The fewer the holes in their bodies, the greater the compression power, and the greater the power of Niden. In the past, Li Yundong's skin was delicate and his pores were naturally small, so he could get twice the result with half the effort when cultivating. When he closed his pores and activated his jinqi because his pores were naturally small, he didn't need to spend more energy on closing his pores, so the power that burst out was particularly strong. But at this time, Li Yundong's pores had become even smaller. Not even a single hair could be seen on his skin. Only when looking carefully could one see a trace of extremely thin fluff on his skin, like that of a baby. In this way, when Li Yundong closed his pores, he could even use up almost no jinqi and he could use more jinqi for fighting. In ancient times, the most commonly used words to describe Taoist cultivators, apart from being sage-like, were a crane with a child's face. The reason why it was called a child's face referred to the fact that the skin of cultivators was getting more and more delicate, and their pores were getting smaller and smaller, just like that of a child. Li Yundong was like this now. At the young age of 20 years old, he had cultivated his yang spirit and body to the Jinshin and Jadechen realms at the same time. This was really shocking and the little foxes couldn't help but be amazed. Li Yundong smiled and drove away the little foxes who had come over to take advantage of him. He smiled at Ling Yu and asked, "Where's Su Chan?" Ling Yu pointed to Su Chan's room and said, "Su Chan has also been cultivating in seclusion these days. I've never seen her work so hard." For various reasons, Li Yundong and the others did not tell the other people of the Fox Zen school about the Penglai sect. Su Chan had taken the blame, so her mind was heavy and she was unhappy all day long. She hid in her room and cultivated alone. Although her behavior was abnormal, the little foxes all thought that she was unhappy because their master had left without saying goodbye, so they didn't think anything else. Although De Sanxian was so busy that everyone had their feet in the air, and even Zhou Qin had to go over to help from time to time, the little foxes were still very considerate and didn't let Su Chan go over to help. It could be regarded as a lucky hit, so they let her hide at home alone to avoid trouble. Li Yundong looked in the direction of Ling Yu's finger and couldn't help smiling. "It's okay. Let her cultivate well. This girl used to be too playful. It's not too late to mend the pen after the sheep is lost." Ling Yu giggled and was about to speak when the little foxes who were already ready to leave at the door shouted and urged, "Shiji Ling Yu, let's go. We're going out." Only then did Ling Yu turn around and wave to Li Yundong. "Leader, I'll go first." Li Yundong looked at the little foxes standing at the door in groups, grinning and ready to go to work. For a moment he felt very emotional. When he had taken these lawless little foxes down the mountain in Mount Tianlong, who would have known that this day would come? Li Yundong watched with a smile as the little foxes were about to leave at the door, but suddenly they all stopped and looked at the stairwell strangely. One after another they made way for him. After a while, a tall girl with blonde hair and blue eyes appeared at the door. It was Chris. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Chris? You're back? Has the crew finished filming?" Chris's face was covered with dust. She looked at the little foxes in surprise and asked curiously, "Where are they going?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "They went to the store to help." Chris laughed. "Is the business in the store getting better and better?" Li Yundong cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Thanks to you it's really good." Chris pursed her lips and smiled. "That's good. You don't have to throw me out to film in the future. I'm so tired that my bones are about to fall apart." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's just this once. There won't be a next time." Chris smiled reservedly and said, "I hope so." As she spoke, she suddenly looked at Li Yundong suspiciously and asked curiously, "Master, why do I feel like you've become a different person? Oh my God, your skin is too fine, isn't it? If other girls see your skin like this, they will gnash their teeth with jealousy." Chris's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Her eyes were filled with envy, and she wished she could replace Li Yundong's skin with hers. After a long time, Ling Yu, who had returned, pushed the door open again. Chris came to her senses and looked at the door with Li Yundong. Ling Yu poked her head in from the door and whispered, "Leader, there's a strange person downstairs. He's holding a blue and white porcelain jar and is staring at our house. Moreover, this person seems to be a cultivator." Li Yundong was stunned. "Huh? Is that so?" At this time, Chris also let out a cry and nodded in agreement. "Yes, I saw him when I went upstairs, but I didn't pay much attention." Li Yundong walked quickly to the window, opened the curtains and looked down. Sure enough, he saw a middle-aged man holding a porcelain jar. He was looking up and glaring in the direction of Li Yundong's house with extreme hatred. Li Yundong's heart sank. He knew that the person downstairs was none other than Yu Tian. This guy had actually come to find him. What did he want to do? Chapter 752. Li Yundong stared at Yu Tian and walked out with a sullen face. As soon as he went out, he saw Ziyuan coming out from the opposite door. Ziyuan saw him at a glance and said, "Did you see Yu Tian?" Li Yundong nodded. Ziyuan sighed softly and said, "Talk to him nicely. It's fine if it makes sense, but if it doesn't, there's nothing we can do. However, don't hurt him. After all, he is also a victim. His family has been ruined." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Don't worry. If I touch him now, won't it be a false accusation?" Ziyuan nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Then I'll go down with you." As they spoke, the two of them went downstairs together. When Yu Tian saw Li Yundong and Ziyuan, the pupils in his eyes instantly widened. He subconsciously hugged the urn in his arms and took a step back. When Li Yundong and Ziyuan walked up to Yu Tian, Ziyuan first bowed and said, "Amateus Jinrenyu. Nice to meet you." Yu Tian took another step back and stared at Ziyuan with great vigilance. He sneered and said, "Don't pretend to be polite." As he spoke, Yu Tian's eyes fell on Li Yundong, full of paranoia and hatred. These days he had been running around trying to find the power of other sects to uphold justice for him. However, the Jingyi school and the Chuanjin sect were unwilling to stand up for him, so how could the other sects be willing to stand up for him? Even Wan Jinyuan kept persuading him to give up, but the more Wan Jinyuan tried to persuade him, the deeper the hatred in Yu Tian's heart became. At first, his hatred was focused on Su Chan, but the more he was rejected, the more his hatred was focused on Li Yundong. In Yu Tian's opinion, if it weren't for Li Yundong, he would have gotten his revenge long ago. Li Yundong was really the number one villain in the cultivation world, the number one devil. Yu Tian stared at Li Yundong and sneered. "Are you Li Yundong?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "Jinrenyu, I think we must have misunderstood each other. The murderer that night was really not Su Chan but someone else. The reason why I took Su Chan there was because I wanted to ask Leader Yu for help. I had no intention of harming her. At that time, Leader Yu also agreed to help us. What reason do I have to do it?" Yu Tian laughed angrily. "Isn't that simple? Of course you're going for the secret heaven patching technique. If you have the guts, then say that you didn't get the heaven patching mystic art." Li Yundong's heart trembled. Just as he was about to say that he would return the secret method of patching heaven to him, he suddenly thought of something and thought to himself, "No, this Yu Tian suddenly came to my house and talked to me without fear. There must be something wrong with this. Isn't he afraid of being silenced by me? Or is there someone watching us in the dark?" If I took out the heaven-patching secret technique now, wouldn't I be confirming his previous words? What would they do if Yu Tian were to bite them again? In an instant, Li Yundong's thoughts raced like lightning, and he swallowed back the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He said in a deep voice, "Jinrenyu, calm down. If I had ordered someone, even if you had Master Wan by your side to protect you that night, you wouldn't have survived. Do you admit that?" Yu Tian sneered and said, "I admit it. But I also admit that some people have a guilty conscience." Seeing that Yu Tian was so paranoid that he couldn't be reasoned with, Li Yundong couldn't help but shake his head. He looked around and said, "Jinrenyu, tell your people to disperse. I won't do anything to you. First, I didn't do this murder and I didn't order it. Second, I'm also investigating this matter to prove my innocence. Third, we are all victims. I deeply sympathize with what happened to you, Jinrenyu. I will do everything I can to help you find the murderer and give you justice." Yu Tian saw that Li Yundong's tone was sincere, and he didn't seem to be lying at all. He couldn't help but be moved, and his originally firm and paranoid heart wavered for a moment. Seeing that he was wavering, Li Yundong tried to persuade him again. "Jinrenyu, think about it. Why would I take the risk of losing my reputation to do such a thing? Moreover, even if I did it, why didn't I grit my teeth and kill you at that time? I know that you have visited a lot of sects these days to ask for help, but have you ever thought that so many sects are afraid of my power? No matter how powerful I, Li Yundong, am I able to deter all the sects in the Chinese cultivation world by myself? I don't think so. As the saying goes, God is watching what people do. Whether I, Li Yundong, have done such an outrageous thing, God will give you an explanation in the future and naturally He will give you justice. When the truth comes to light one day, I, Li Yundong, am willing to personally capture this murderer in front of you and let you deal with him. If there is a single lie in my mouth, let me be struck by lightning." Yu Tian was silent. He stared at Li Yundong like a wolf and an eagle. He wanted to see a trace of hypocrisy, uneasiness and guilt on Li Yundong's face, but no matter how he looked, he could only see sincerity in Li Yundong's eyes. Yu Tian stared at Li Yundong for a long time before he slowly stepped back. After taking a few steps back, he said unwillingly, "I will keep an eye on you and so will God. Remember what you said." Li Yundong said seriously, "Don't worry, Jinrenyu. I will remember every word I said before. I will definitely give you justice." Justice, justice. Yu Tian stood where he was, holding the urn tightly in his arms and muttering to himself in a low voice. He couldn't help but think of the scene where he had been running into a wall in all the major sects these days. For a moment he had mixed feelings. Yu Tian couldn't help laughing and 2 lines of tears rolled down his cheeks. As he laughed, he walked out of the community, ignoring the surprised gazes of the other people in the community. After walking out of the community, a middle-aged man slowly followed behind him. It was Wang Jinyuan. Yu Tian saw Wang Jinyuan at a glance and was silent for a while. At this time Wang Jinyuan sighed and said, "Alas, good eloquence, really good eloquence." Yu Tian was stunned. He suddenly turned his head and said in a low voice, "What eloquence?" Wang Jinyuan shook his head and sighed. "I've heard that a person with good eloquence can fight against 1,000,000 soldiers with his silver tongue. I always thought that this sentence was unbelievable. After all, no matter how eloquent a person is, when faced with 1,000,000 soldiers, it is impossible for him to stop the rolling torrent of the war machine. But now I believe it." Yu Tian's eyes suddenly burst into a bright light. "Master Wan, what do you want to say?" Wang Jinyuan looked at Yu Tian and said, "Jinrenyu, do you believe Li Yundong's words?" Yu Tian hesitated for a moment and said, "What he said may have some truth." Yu Tian was originally a language teacher in the school and he was an honest man. When an honest man went crazy he became more and more terrifying. When he bit people he would bite them to the bone. However, as he kept running into a wall these days, his crazy anger and hatred were slowly being tortured. Today, when he met Li Yundong and talked with him, he was moved by Li Yundong's sincerity and his heart slowly calmed down. He was inclined to be a rational person. As soon as he calmed down, he immediately thought that there were many things wrong. However, Wang Jinyuan was not willing to let him calm down. He immediately added fuel to the fire and said, "Do you believe the reasoning he told you or do you believe his vow? Hey Jinrenyu, you underestimate Li Yundong. He can defeat the entire Japanese cultivation world alone. It can be said that although there are only more than 200 Japanese cultivators from Mount Longhu, they are all top masters in the Japanese cultivation world. They are the elites of the elites. Li Yundong can defeat many Jinshin masters and 2 lightning retribution masters in a row. What does this mean? I shudder when I hear it. When I meet such an opponent, my reaction will definitely be to turn around and run. Even I am like this, let alone others. Jingyi school is now in trouble both internally and externally, and they are unwilling to stand up for you. The Chuanjin Dragon sect has always been on good terms with Li Yundong. If these two sects in the cultivation world are like this, how can the other sects be willing to stand up for you? They are all afraid of Li Yundong's divine power. Besides, if you believe his oath, it would be ridiculous. Haven't you noticed that he has already cultivated to the realm of the perfect jade body? This is the highest realm of the immortal Jinshin. He is only one step away from the lightning retribution realm. When the thunder awakens, the heavenly thunder will descend. After he passes through the lightning retribution, only the magic formation and the 9 thunders in the world can harm him. How can he be afraid of the 5 thunders? These words suddenly made Yu Youtian's eyes widen, and his whole body tremble. He clenched his fists tightly and his face turned purple. He roared in a low voice, ashamed and angry, "So that's how it is, so that's how it is. You lied to me." When Wang Jinyuan saw that Yu Youtian was pointing the spear at Li Yundong again, he couldn't help but feel happy in his heart. However, his face was full of compassion. He sighed and said, "Jinrenyu, you are an honest man. It's not good for you to be so gullible." Yu Youtian flew into a rage. He turned around and walked toward Li Yundong's home. "I'll go find him again." However, Wang Jinyuan stopped him and said, "Forget it. I've already sent away the cameraman you invited just now. If you want to take a picture of him attacking you, you definitely won't be able to. Li Yundong is not stupid. Even if he is, Ziyuan beside him is not." As he spoke, Wang Jinyuan patted Yu Youtian with a heavy expression and sighed, "Jinrenyu, your opponent, is really too powerful." Yu Youtian's chest rose and fell violently. The corners of his eyes were so wide that they looked as if they were going to split open. A low roar then burst out from between his teeth. Could it be? I, Yu Youtian, am unable to avenge the murder of my wife and son just like that? However, Wang Jinyuan's expression suddenly changed and he said, "No, it's not that there's no way to take revenge, but we have to think about it in the long run. Think about it in the long run." Yu Youtian repeated these words in a low voice several times. Suddenly he laughed bitterly and said, "Li Yundong is so powerful at such a young age. I'm almost 50 years old. How can I think about it in the long run?" Wang Jinyuan smiled slightly. His smile was like the devil of Avicii luring a lost soul. He said with a compassionate face, "Jinrenyu, I know a top master. His cultivation is not inferior to any cultivator in the world, and he is chivalrous and brave. It's best to fight against injustice. If you find him, he will definitely help you take revenge." Yu Youtian's eyes suddenly narrowed and his breathing quickened. "Who is it?" Chapter 753. After Yu Youtian left, Li Yundong, who was on his way home, suddenly asked Ziyuan, "Do you think Yu Youtian will change his mind and let it go?" Ziyuan pondered for a while and said, "It's hard to say. I once heard from my master that Yu Qing had found an honest man to be her husband. At that time, the older generation of cultivators in the cultivation world were very surprised. If Yu Youtian was really an honest man, he might not have thought of a way to provoke you to attack him. Moreover, no matter how rational a person is, he can't stand being fanned by someone next to him. If someone egged him on, I'm afraid he would go down the wrong path." Li Yundong stopped at the door and sighed. "I hope he doesn't go too deep." But after entering the house, Li Yundong was surprised to find that Chris was sitting on the sofa in the living room, covering her mouth with one hand and tears falling down. Li Yundong and Ziyuan immediately looked at each other. In their impression, Chris had a strong character, and sometimes she was resolute and decisive. She was not inferior to Zhou Qin at all. They had never seen Chris so weak. Li Yundong couldn't help walking over to her and asking, "Chris, what happened? Why are you crying?" Chris raised her head and looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. Her eyes were full of unwillingness, sadness, and struggle. After staring at him for a while, she suddenly stood up, hugged Li Yundong and sobbed. "My grandma is seriously ill and in the hospital. I miss her." Li Yundong hadn't expected that Chris would suddenly hug him. He opened his arms, not knowing whether to hug her or where to put them. He looked at Ziyuan helplessly, but she turned her face away and didn't look at him at all. Li Yundong had no choice but to pat Chris on the shoulder and ask softly, "Hey Chris, calm down. How did your grandma suddenly become seriously ill?" I remember you told me about her. Isn't she a very healthy person? When your brother came to ask you to go back, did he give you false information? Chris cried on Li Yundong's shoulder for a long time. Then she raised her head, wiped her tears, shook her head and said, I just called back to ask. My father and mother both said that my grandmother suddenly had a cerebral thrombosis and was in a severe coma. She was admitted to the hospital and is now unconscious. I just called the hospital and asked about it. I also contacted the head nurse in charge of my health. She told me that my grandma might have a hard time this time. Chris had grown up with her grandmother and had a deep relationship with her. Once she confirmed that Lin Guang had fallen ill, Chris immediately panicked. She was so anxious to return home that she couldn't wait to rush back to her grandmother's side. When Li Yundong heard what she said, he secretly admired Chris for being so meticulous at such a critical moment. If it were anyone else, they would have thrown the phone away and immediately bought a plane ticket to rush back. But Chris was still calm enough to call the hospital and even find the head nurse. Amazing, really amazing. Li Yundong thought to himself, regardless of the race of Chris's skin, the courage and meticulousness this woman showed during the school shooting are enough to make people look at her with admiration. At this time, in the face of danger, she was able to grasp the key to the problem at once and couldn't control her emotions until she confirmed the facts. Such a firm will is really rare. In the future, if her cultivation is successful with her character, I'm afraid that she will also be a first-class fighter. This thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind. He patted Chris on the shoulder and comforted her. Don't worry. Filial piety is the most important of all virtues. Don't think that we cultivators are cold-blooded animals who don't eat the food of the world and don't care about worldly feelings. You should go back quickly. Chris looked at Li Yundong gratefully and turned to walk to her room. But after taking 2 steps, she turned around again and said with a worried face, Master, if I go back this time, I won't be able to come back again, will I? Li Yundong looked at her worried and unwilling expression and suddenly laughed. What's wrong? Are you tired of being a nominal disciple? Or do you dislike me for not teaching you cultivation? Chris lowered her head, forced a smile and said bitterly, I know. I'm an outsider. You will always have a lot of concerns. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Chris. He suddenly walked over and pulled her to the sofa. He patted her on the shoulder and motioned for her to sit down. Chris, in fact, skin and race are not important. What's important is the huge difference between us. In the eyes of Americans, you are a national expert, but can you really understand the real language? Not to mention you, even I find it difficult to read it. I'm afraid that only people like Ziyuan can read it smoothly and freely. Moreover, when you read the poems, can you really feel the beauty of these poems like we do? Li Yundong sighed and said, You are very good, but can you translate the sentence, sparse shadow slanting across the clear water, faint fragrance floating in the moonlight at dusk, perfectly? Even if you can the translated sentence have the artistic conception of this poem? For example, your proudest poet, Whitman. In his Leaves of Grass, I remember there is a poem called From the Vast Sea of People. When translated, a few lines of the poem are, From the vast sea of people, a drop of dew comes slowly and whispers to me, I love you and soon I will die. After walking through thousands of mountains and rivers, I just want to see you and touch you. As long as I don't see you, I won't leave the world because I'm afraid of losing you. Chris, I dare say that in our country, as long as a person is a little conceited, he will dare to pat his chest and say that his poem is 100 times or even 10,000 times better than this poem. Could it be that they had really picked Whitman? No, this is caused by the huge gap between the East and the West. The translation of The Dream of the Red Chamber and The Romance of the Three Kingdoms will always be niche books for Westerners, but in our East, these are classics that everyone must read. As he spoke, Li Yundong pressed his hand on Chris's shoulder. A wave of heat emanated from his palm, making Chris feel an inexplicable and powerful force enveloping her body, filling her body and mind with a sense of awe. It was as if the person standing in front of her was not a boy who was a little younger than her, but a giant who could support the sky and the earth. Li Yundong saw that Chris was looking at him with an inexplicable awe. He smiled and continued to untie the knot in Chris's heart. He said, Chris, it's not that I don't want to teach you cultivation. If I teach you cultivation, I can guarantee that within a year, you will be able to reach the Jinshin phase. I can even teach you to be the best female cultivator in the world. You Westerners have unique physical conditions for cultivation. You can get started quickly, see results quickly and fight fiercely. This is determined by the constitution of the furnace. But I can guarantee that after you reach the Jinshin phase, you will not be able to make any further progress. Do you know why? Chris shook her head blankly. She felt that she was like a child who knew nothing, while Li Yundong was like a knowledgeable master. She could only listen to the man talk in front of her in fear. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Because if I want to teach you cultivation, you will definitely do as I say. You only know how it is but you don't know why it is. Because with your Western thinking, you can't fully understand everything I'm saying. The huge difference and estrangement will cause you to encounter a huge bottleneck after you enter the Jinshin phase. You can't understand what nature means and the unity of heaven and man are. You can't understand what the infinite void is and what all the methods are. You have a good foundation but at best, you are only at the level of a 5th or 6th grade primary school student. It will be as difficult as ascending to heaven for you to understand all this. Your cultivation talent is not bad. You are an excellent human cauldron, and your luck is also good. If you can't make any further progress after reaching the Jinshin phase and become a powerful fighter, it would be a pity. I hope that you can have a higher realm and attainments in the future. Do you understand?" Chris looked at Li Yundong in horror. Her mouth wriggled and she kept asking herself, "Can I really reach the realm that Master said? Can I really? Does Master think so highly of me?" Chris had originally been a very arrogant girl, but the longer she had been dealing with Li Yundong, the more she had been unconvinced at the beginning to curiosity, to worship, to awe, and now to panic and confusion. Especially when Li Yundong had pressed his hand on her just now, Chris even felt as if she had become a small stone in an instant, while Li Yundong was a big Buddha standing alone. Seeing the confusion in her eyes, Li Yundong knew that she must be struggling in her heart. He patted Chris on the shoulder and said, "Don't think about it for now. It will take a long time to fly from Tianan City to Harrisburg. Think about it slowly when the time comes." Chris glanced at Li Yundong, and her plump red lips wriggled slightly. She swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She lowered her head and slowly walked towards her room, her steps so heavy as if she was carrying a mountain on her back. Ziyuan, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said to Li Yundong in a low voice, "By the way, Li Yundong, let Su-chan go with her. Recently, I've been worried that something will happen. Let Su-chan go with her so that no one will make a fuss about her being framed. It can be considered as going out to hide." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. He smiled and said, "Okay. Chaner has never been abroad before. Hey, by the way, why don't you go with her?" Ziyuan was also stunned. Me too?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I can't go. I can't leave the Fox Zen school now. Besides, in a while it will be time to go through the Thunder Retribution and I can't leave. What's more, I'm worried about Chaner going alone. I'll be relieved if you go." As he said this, he looked at Chris, who was walking with heavy steps. He suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Besides, your medical skills are excellent. Maybe you can treat Chris's grandmother when you get there. If Chris is really tricked into going back and is treated badly, you can still help her." Ziyuan stared at Li Yundong and suddenly laughed. "I saw that you were cold to Chris before, so I thought you didn't care about this cheap disciple at all. Now I know that you treat her like a treasure." Li Yundong looked at Chris's back and smiled slowly. "How many people in the world have the good fortune to let her be transformed by the Duanjindan? If I let such a person go, she will immediately be accepted as a disciple by other sections. Won't I make a strong enemy for myself later?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Okay, I know what you're thinking. I'll go. Don't worry." As she said this, she turned and walked to her room, ready to pack her luggage. Li Yundong looked at her back and smiled. He had another purpose for sending Ziyuan away, to give her a surprise and compensation. Before she came back, he wanted to learn the secret method of patching heaven and repair her powerful magical weapon. If Ziyuan were there with her character, she would definitely not allow Li Yundong to read the secret method of patching heaven, so Li Yundong could only send her away as far as possible. After watching Ziyuan leave, Li Yundong returned to his room and opened the secret method of patching heaven. A line of words popped up on the first line. In the past, Gonggong and Zhuanshu fought for the throne. They were so angry that they touched the Buzhou mountain. The pillar of heaven was broken and the earth was destroyed. The sky tilted to the northwest, so the sun, moon, and stars moved. The earth was not satisfied to the southwest, so the water and dust returned. Nuwa refined the five-colored godstone to mend the sky, and we refined the five-colored Niden to mend the sky. This technique responds to the mandate of heaven and invites heaven's merit. It is really the best technique in the world. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw the inscription on the title page. There were 3 words written on it: Zhang Sanfeng. Chapter 754. Li Yundong suddenly saw that the signature on the title page was Zhang Sanfeng, the founder of the Sanfeng sect of Taoism. He immediately picked up the book in surprise and looked at it carefully. But after reading for a while, Li Yundong found that although the book looked a little old, it was definitely not an antique cultural relic that had been passed down for hundreds of years. It must be a reprint. Perhaps Zhang Sanfeng had mentioned the preface to this secret book. But when Li Yundong flipped to the next page, he saw that the first sentence of the thick black seal script at the beginning of the book was written, "The way of heaven, take away the surpluses and make up for the deficiencies." Then there was a detailed description of cultivation methods. Before Li Yundong had met Su Chan, his understanding of the way of heaven is to make up for what is lacking had always been based on Jin Yong's Nine Sutra. However, after cultivating and reading the ancient books, Li Yundong realized that this sentence came from the 77th chapter of Lao Zi's Tao Te Ching. If the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor was a must-read enlightenment for cultivators, then the Tao Te Ching by Lao Zi, the founder of Taoism, was a must-read high-level internal reference for every cultivator. There was even a saying in the cultivation world that whoever couldn't understand the Tao Te Ching would have no hope for the thunder retribution in his life. The Zhuji phase relied on the strength of one's own furnace and one's own external conditions. The same was true for Shintong and Yang spirit. Similarly, the Jinshin phase could also be achieved with a huge amount of money in addition to chance coincidences. However, after reaching the Jinshin phase, one must truly understand the realm of cultivation and the philosophical ideas in cultivation. It was absolutely impossible not to be smart. Otherwise, cultivators couldn't understand the sentence in Lao Zi's Tao Te Ching: "The Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature." How could they talk about following the heart and moving heaven and earth with a thought? If they couldn't achieve the unity of heaven and man, how could they talk about the top level of the Jinshin phase? If they didn't cultivate to the top level of the Jinshin phase, how could they survive the thunder retribution? In a few minutes, the heavenly thunder would smash the half-baked Jinshin into pieces. As an experienced person, Li Yundong naturally knew that 1, 2 and 3 seemed simple, but since ancient times there had been countless cultivators in Chinese history, but there were only a few who had really understood 1, 2 and 3. It could even be said that Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu might not have been able to understand 1, 2 and 3 for every generation. However, there was no doubt that the person who wrote this secret manual had comprehended the 1, 2, 3 within it. This sentence, "The way of heaven, take away surpluses and mend deficiencies," was talking about the way of magical treasures. The power of magic treasures came from the heavens, and the way of the heavens is to take away excess and make up for deficiency. This meant that after a magic treasure was created, if no one used it, it would lose more power than it could replenish itself, and its power would continue to decline. Although Dharma treasures were intelligent, they were inanimate objects after all. They were not like the spirit of all living things, humans who knew how to cultivate and constantly improve themselves. Therefore, if a magical treasure wanted to become stronger, if it wanted to repair itself after being damaged, it needed the help of others. This was the first sentence in the second chapter that Li Yundong opened. The way of man is to take away the insufficiency and make up for the excess. When these two meanings were combined, it meant that Dharma treasures did not know how to cultivate themselves, so their Dharma power was constantly losing and declining. However, humans were the spirit of all living things. They knew how to cultivate themselves and store excess essence qi. Therefore, it was to take away the insufficiency and make up for the excess. Why did the strength of cultivators increase? Why did the more Jinchi cultivated, the stronger it became? Why did people grow up? Why did people get fatter the more they ate? The reason was very simple. Laozi, the founder of Taoism in 571 BC, Taishang Laojun of the Nine Heavens Divine Night Realm, had long given the answer: take away the insufficiency and make up for the excess. It was also because of this that cultivators could use their own the way of man, giving away the excess to make up for the way of heaven, making up for the deficiency. This was the theoretical basis why Taoist cultivators firmly believed that man could conquer heaven. Although Li Yundong had read many cultivation classics, None of them had explained the way of heaven and the way of man so thoroughly and so brightly. As Li Yundong flipped through the classics, he sighed in his heart, the Penglai sect is indeed worthy of being a powerful sect that was once prosperous. Although I don't know how glorious this sect was at its peak, the classics left behind by the Penglai sect are enough to make the author of this book famous in history. A cultivator who can write such an exquisite cultivation article must be an earth-shattering great cultivator. Li Yundong quickly flipped through the classics, but he didn't find the author's name in it. He couldn't help but sigh and say, in the 5,000 years of Chinese history, how many heroes have been buried in the torrential history? Such a great cultivator didn't leave his mark in the long river of history at all? While he was sighing, Li Yundong couldn't help but see Zhang Sanfeng's preface on the title page. He suddenly thought, could it be that after reading this classic Zhenren Zhang comprehended the truth of cultivation and founded the Sanfeng sect? While Li Yundong was guessing, he suddenly heard a knock on the door. Li Yundong tilted his ear and knew who was knocking. He immediately laughed and quietly walked to the back of the door to hide. After knocking on the door for a while, the person saw that there was no response, so he carefully poked his head in. As soon as he looked around, Li Yundong, who was hiding behind the door, slapped him on the head. This person was none other than Su Chan. Su Chan let out a cry and quickly grabbed upward with one hand. In an instant, a ball of flame jumped up in the palm of her other hand. This ball of flame quickly stretched into the shape of a sharp blade and stabbed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong quickly smiled and said, "It's me, it's me." However, Su Chan couldn't hold back. The fire sword was about to pierce Li Yundong's chest. Her face changed dramatically and she suddenly wanted to withdraw her strength. But at this time, Li Yundong stretched out his hand and flicked his finger on Su Chan's aggressive fire sword. With a snap, her fire sword was smashed into pieces. For a moment, it turned into countless sparks and quickly disappeared in the air. Li Yundong saw that the place where the fire sword had passed was scorched black. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "Do you want to kill your husband? Where did you learn magic? So powerful." However, Su Chan pouted and said unhappily, "What's so powerful about it? You broke the spell that I had been learning for several days with just one finger." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and slapped the girl's round and perky butt. "Nonsense, isn't it powerful? If it had been me in the past, I'm afraid I would have been lying in bed again. Did you come all the way here just to kill your husband?" Su Chan covered her perky buttocks with both hands and said resentfully, "I've been practicing magic for a few days. I just wanted you to see it." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh when he saw her childish desire to take credit. "What's the matter? You've been in a bad mood these days, so you've been practicing hard? What magic have you learned? Show it to me." However, Su Chan pouted and tilted her head. "No. I've been practicing hard for a few days, but in your eyes, isn't it still like a child playing? It's boring. I won't show it." Li Yundong saw that the little girl's eyes were full of loss and disappointment. It was obvious that he had run over excitedly to show off his treasures, but he hadn't expected that he would destroy her magic with a flick of his finger and sweep away her prestige. The little girl was naturally very disappointed in her heart. Li Yundong put his arms around the little girl's soft waist with a smile, kissed her on the cheek and said with a smile, "Silly, I'm about to go through the thunder retribution. My cultivation is several levels higher than yours. How can I compare with you? If I were still in the Yangshan phase, I would have been hit just now. So don't belittle yourself. You look so ugly with a straight face. Be careful that I don't like you." As expected, Su Chan was shocked. She quickly covered her face with both hands and said in horror, "Am I really ugly? Then don't look at me. I'm going to touch up some makeup." Women put on makeup for the man they liked, and Su Chan was naturally the same. Her nervous look immediately made Li Yundong laugh. He lovingly picked her up and kissed her heavily. Su Chan hadn't expected that Li Yundong would suddenly kiss her. For a moment, her eyes widened and her body was a little stiff. But soon, her body softened as if she was about to turn into a pool of spring water. She softly melted in Li Yundong's arms. When their lips separated, Su Chan blushed and smiled foolishly. "Why are you kissing me when I'm so ugly?" Li Yundong put on a straight face and pretended to be angry. "Nonsense. Which bastard said that my girl is ugly?" Su Chan giggled and stretched out her jade-like fingers to touch Li Yundong's cheek. "You're so shameless. You're so thick-skinned." Li Yundong chuckled. "I know something even more shameless." As he said this, Li Yundong put on a solemn expression and said seriously, "Benefactor, Do you want to reach the Jinshin phase? Do you want to quickly become a great cultivator? Please dial 138x times x times x. If you want to study the Merriment Buddha with me, please dial 1. If you want to study the Merriment Buddha with me, please dial 2. If you want to study the Merriment Buddha with me, please dial 3. If you want to study the Merriment Buddha with me, please dial 4. If you want to study the Merriment Buddha alone, please hang up. For a moment, Su Chan's cheeks turned red. She leaned on Li Yundong's shoulder and laughed so hard that her whole body trembled. However, Li Yundong still said seriously, "This benefactor, this Tanyu, this beautiful girl, hurry up and choose your number. Do you want to choose 1, 2, 3 or 4? Please feel free to choose. I won't force you." These days, Su Chan's mind had been heavy and she had been depressed. At this time, when she was teased by Li Yundong, she laughed so hard that the unhappiness in her heart seemed to fly beyond the clouds. She blushed, bit her lips gently with her snow-white teeth and giggled. "Can I choose to hang up the phone?" Li Yundong said in surprise. "What? Haven't you already cultivated this magic skill to the 9th level? You still want to cultivate it? Aren't you afraid of getting calluses?" Su Chan giggled and leaned against Li Yundong's ear, blowing like orchids, but her hand boldly touched Li Yundong's lower body. She looked at him coquettishly and said softly, "Yundong, you are now in the Jinshin phase." With a beauty in his arms, speaking softly and with a faint fragrance, it was really erotic. As soon as Su Chan's hand moved down, Li Yundong immediately became angry. The Vajra pestle was raised high, and the little girl's hand was so scared that she retracted it. But when the little girl's eyes showed a hint of charm that was enough to melt Li Yundong, and when her hand reached down again, Li Yundong grabbed her hand and said softly with a smile, "Little girl, there's still a long time. You'll go out in a while." At this time the little girl was also moved. Her eyes were like silk and she asked with blurred eyes, "What? Why should I go out? I don't want to go out. I want to be with you." Li Yundong laughed, hugged the little girl and kissed her heavily again. Their tongues were entangled and they were locked in a fierce battle. After a long time, Li Yundong injected his pure jinchi into the little girl's mouth. When Su Chan received this jinchi, her whole body suddenly trembled, and her mind slowly became sober. Only then did Li Yundong let go of her. He smiled and told her about Chris, saying, "Accompany her to have a look. Just be her bodyguard this time, okay?" Although Su Chan was reluctant to leave, she also knew that Li Yundong actually wanted her to leave this troublesome place for a while, so she used this excuse. The little girl looked at Li Yundong reluctantly, drawing circles on his chest with her fingers, and said with some resentment, "But how long will it take?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "It will be very soon. It will be a few days, at least 10 days at most. Anyway, I will definitely come back before the spring festival. If you want to spend it outside, I won't allow it." Only then did Su Chan's worry turn into joy. But just as the little girl was about to speak, she suddenly heard Chris's surprised voice coming from outside. "Shiji Ziyuan, what are you doing? What are you thinking about?" Ziyuan's panicked voice came from the door. I'm fine. Are you okay? Let's go quickly." As she said this, she cleared her throat and pretended to be calm as she said to Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, we have to go." Li Yunyang took Su Chan's little hand and went out of the door, only to see that Ziyuan had already hidden at the door. Although her back was facing him, from her snow-white and slender neck, he could still see that this fairy sister's face was blushing all the way to the root of her neck. The pink and decadent color was really frightening. Only then did Li Yundong realize that Ziyuan had been eavesdropping just now. This fairy sister is not kind. Late at night, I worked hard to finish a chapter. Benefactors, Tanyu, beautiful girls, do you want to understand the happy Buddha? Do you want to choose 1, 2, 3 or 4? Please feel free to choose, I will not force you. Hey, I'm just kidding. Recently, some readers have been asking me about opening a group. Many enthusiastic readers want to provide me with a VIP group, but a group of 200 people is really a little inadequate, so I'd better consider opening a super group of 500 people in the future. Now the super group is open. 823139993. If you want to join, hurry up. This group will probably be full in a day. However, I will go to sleep in a while and I guess the group leader will also go to sleep. There are only 2 administrators in the group, so even if the children add in the middle of the night, I'm afraid they won't be able to get in. It's better to wait until tomorrow morning. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.